The Galactic Republic stands at the centerpiece of nearly all of Star Wars storytelling. What came before is lost to legend. What followed during the reign of the Empire was shaped by heroes striving to restore it. The Jedi swore an oath to become its guardians, defenders of justice from across the stars. Adversely, the Sith returned time and time again as well, ever with the same goal: to burn it all to ashes. For 25,000 years, the Republic stood as the cradle of galactic society, gathering countless planets and star systems under its wings of protection and democracy. But while historians like to speak of it as the golden age of peace and progression, it was in truth anything but. All-consuming fires of war ravaged across the star systems every couple hundred years, some ignited by the Sith, others by the Republic itself. So today, acolytes and historians of the Force, welcome back to the archives. We have a very special documentary holocron prepared for you. We have spoken of the origins of the Sith, the origins of the Jedi, and even the origins of the galaxy itself. But those always stop just short of one pivotal event in galactic history: the founding of the Republic. That was by design, my friends, because now, the time has come at last. In this documentary event, we are proud to present the full history of the Galactic Republic, beginning with its inception in 25,000 BBY, all the way to its dissolution in 19 BBY at the end of the Clone Wars. We will recount its triumphs, its failures, and the wars that defined it. For clarity, we will be focusing only on the events that shaped the Republic's greater story. Individual planets, minor skirmishes, and isolated developments will be covered when they are directly impacting the galactic stage. So if you happen to find interest in a specific war or a period of time that we cover, and want to see it explored in minute detail, then be sure to leave a comment down below letting us know. Something important to note before we begin is we will be exclusively dissecting the Legends version of the history of the Republic. And if at the end of this cosmic journey you sense that you desire more knowledge about a galaxy far, far away, crush that subscribe button and become an acolyte of our archives. Now, let's begin our journey through the rise, reign, and the eventual ruin of the Galactic Republic. Chapter 1: The Unification Era. The formation of the Republic would begin where the Infinite Empire ended. The Rakata had used Force-based technology to conquer a vast majority of space. The Rakata had been responsible for the creation of the very first hyperdrive systems, which originally functioned off of the Force. As a result, they could only lock on and travel to planets that were potent with Force energy. But when the Infinite Empire crumbled, the settled worlds threw off their shackles of their Rakatan oppressors. In the wake of the Infinite Empire's defeat, these former slave worlds finally got their hands on that same technology. It would be the scientists of Corellia who first succeeded in modifying the Rakatan hyperdrives to include technologically based workarounds and engineered around the Force-attuned components. They simply supplemented all of the components that relied on the Force energy with mechanical devices that would do the exact same thing. Only on Corellia, they did it better. The regular hyperdrives were preferable because they didn't require a Force-rich world to lock onto. They could jump anywhere in the galaxy so long as accurate coordinates were available for that jump. In this day, the limited navicomputers on starships required the use of hyperspace beacons to help the jumps more accurate. Hyperspace beacons were artificially created space stations that rested in real space, but transmitted hyperspace information into incoming vessels. It's best to look at them as the lighthouses of a Star Wars galaxy, guiding each ship along the correct course. Beacons recorded local hyperspace data, which was then downloaded by visiting spacecrafts. Each beacon was a massive supercomputer that kept accurate data on routes to other beacons, and provided practical limitations on hyperspace jumps. They were also mandatory during the proto-era of hyperspace travel, and they would be in use for tens of thousands of years until enough area of space was charted for navicomputers. And after this, the computers could make the jumps themselves. During this time, it was generally dangerous to journey outside of established lighthouse networks. This was why hyperspace explorers usually had the most dangerous job in the entire galaxy of this era. They were the ones who would journey out into the unknown, making several micro jumps and plotting the course on a map along the way. But of course, it would be they who would first have dibs on the riches of any world that lay undiscovered in the wider unknown space. Something I want to hit home early is the development of hyperspace travel was a huge leap forward in galactic progress. For the first time, the settled worlds of the core, which mainly consisted of Coruscant, Corellia, Alderaan, and Duro, were finally able to meet and commune with one another. They had been aware of each other for generations, but were unable to fully establish contact until now. Other worlds joining them would be urbanized. Worlds like Alsakan, the industrial Aksum, the shipbuilding Kuat, the agricultural Chandrila, the politically kind Kamas, the scientifically advanced Shaken, and the commerce hub of Brental. all officially forming what we know as the core of what would become the Republic. But despite their newfound unity, in the beginning they were little more than a small collection of civilizations rather than a singular common one. There was no common goal at all at this point, just individuals pursuing their own ambitions among worlds. Yet while these planets were brought together in peace, the tumultuous history of this society would begin with what is known as the Unification Wars. Interestingly, we know very little about this war, but what we do know is that it was what spurred the Republic into existence. But here's the information that we have. The year is 25,053 BBY. The Jedi Order had come to rest on the world of Ossus, and the absence of the Rakata had left a power vacuum in the galaxy. While the politics of this era remain a mystery, an infamous warlord by the name of Zakranand Minus was generally painted as the main villain of the conflict. It is known that the Jedi Order took a part in this war and fought against Minus as they deemed his ways to be evil. One of my favorite pieces of lore is we know that the Bendu monks actually fought alongside the Jedi Knights. But once the war was over, the core worlds would come together and sign the Galactic Constitution, officially forming the Republic. The Constitution was written by a member of House Organa from Alderaan, and it would invest executive legislative powers into the Galactic Senate, which of course was the judicial powers in the Supreme Court. It set Coruscant as the capital, Galactic Basic Standard the official language, and the Galactic Credit Standard as the official currency. The Constitution would also organize a position to be known as the President of State or the Head of State of Government. This position would later be called the Supreme Chancellor. And following the horrific time that they all experienced under the Infinite Empire, the Rakata, the Galactic Constitution included the clause known as the Rights of Sentience. The Rights of Sentience laid out the rights of all citizens of the Republic, what they were entitled to, while also formally outlawing slavery. At this point in the galaxy, this was considered a radical change, since slavery had sort of been normalized by ancient civilizations. But this made the Republic quite attractive to disenfranchised worlds that needed support, help, unity, love, and acceptance. Following the end of the Unification Wars, the Republic would then take the symbol that was waved by the Dai Bendu as their official insignia, and eventually, they would run into the Jedi Order once more. After the end of the war, many didn't regard the Jedi with too much thought at all. They believed that they were just strange mystics or wizards, but the Jedi had actually been their silent guardians, watching over the young Republic without any interference. And little did they know that these odd monks would forever shape their history from this moment forward. And now we reach Chapter 2, the Expansionist period. 24,953 BBY kicked off the Expansionist period in galactic history. This would come to be known as a trial by fire for the young Republic. But it would begin with a destiny-altering discovery. A few Duro scouts would find the Perlemian trade route, a hyperspace linking Coruscant directly to the planet of Ossus. When they landed on Ossus, the Republic would come into contact with the Jedi Order officially, and would meet with the Grand Master of the time, a Grand Master by the name of Hane Tiar. They would invite him to take a tour of the Republic, and so the Grand Master departed with these strange travelers. TR spent some time with the representatives of the Republic, and saw how promising the future of this new system actually was, as it had the potential to bring peace to the galaxy, to thrust it into an age of progression. With this new information, the Grand Master eagerly returned to Ossus, and his arrival was followed by several weeks of debate and meditation amongst the Jedi Council. It was around this time that there was also some trouble brewing between two powerful civilizations on the other side of the galaxy, the Tion Cluster and the Hutt Empire. Trouble that was aimed right at the fledgling Republic. Since Ossus happened to be poised right between the two of them though, it was the perfect bulwark of defense. Because of this, the Jedi Order would officially choose to join the Republic as a result of this new threat, and the era would begin. Unfortunately, the Jedi would end up getting preoccupied for a period of time in the event known as the First Great Schism. The First Great Schism in the Civil War of the Jedi occurred in the year 24,500 BBY, and occurred when a man by the name of Zendor split off from the Jedi Order. Venturing to his neighboring planet of Leto, Zendor, his lover Arden Lin, and his followers would form what is known as the Legions of Leto, and would become the first official group of Dark Jedi. Their heresy would echo throughout history, inspiring many more evils to come. At first, the Jedi and the Legion would agree to keep their fighting private, and to not involve the Republic whatsoever. However, Zendor would end up going behind the Jedi's back to Coruscant, and attempted to sway the Republic in favor of the Legions of Leto behind their back. He attempted to convince the Senate that the Jedi only wanted control. However, the Senate was not convinced by his arguments, and they determined that they would distance themselves from the Jedi as a result. During this time, small battles erupted during the core worlds between the Force-using religions, until the Jedi brought the legions out of the Republic in order to fight on ground clear of civilians. For an entire year, the Jedi and the legions of Leto battled, until Xandor was murdered and his legions defeated at the Battle of Colomus. Arden Lyn would eventually end up getting struck down by Irkalla, as well as by the Grand Master, Pina, also known as the Green Blade, a legendary Jedi figure of this era. But using a powerful artifact, Arden Lyn would not die from her injuries, but instead was put into a mystical slumber, not to be broken until the time of the Great Galactic Empire. Though the Jedi emerged victorious from this battle, it was a time of great sorrow for them, and only one of the many schisms that would follow. Elsewhere, it was a time of great exploration for the Republic Trailblazers. Things were proceeding rapidly at the time. Hyperspace scouts pursued rumors and adventures that brought them deeper into the arms of the galaxy. At first, it was traders rather than warriors who drove galactic expansion, bartering for navigational information and discovering that the stars were thick with civilizations. This was a time of curiosity and wonder rather than one of warfare and conquest, a time where the borders of the Republic steadily expanded over millennia. Clear and stable paths through hyperspace known as hyperlanes became the bedrock of travel, communication, and all commerce. While trailblazing these paths was difficult, it was also incredibly rewarding. Colonization progress was steady pace, as it was now the Inner Rim that rocketed them along with two important hyperlanes, the Corellian Run and the Perlemian trade route. The Corellian Run was named as such because the traders from the world were common sites along it. The Perlemian got its name because Perlemia shipwrights built so many of the Republic scout ships. The portion of space was defined by the Corellian Run and the Perlemian Run. The Perlemian Run eventually became known as the Slice. Brave traders made fortunes on the Rim, creating a network of depots that were extending deeper into the known galaxy. While conflicts between different worlds, colonists, and traders did actually occur, they were rare and fizzled out quickly as well. At this point in time, everyone generally agreed that the galaxy was simply too big to waste time on pointless skirmishes. Almost all exploration would take place on the eastern half of the galaxy during this time, with the western half becoming regarded as the unknown regions. Space due west of Coruscant resisted exploration as well. No pathways from the Perlemian or the Corellian Run were discovered in that direction, nor could they find any other stable hyperlane. And so progress was limited to extremely treacherous 1 to 2 light-year hops into the briar patch of hyperspace anomalies, which seemed to fence off all of the western portion of the galaxy. But as the Republic continued to expand up and down the galactic map, they would end up running into their first major conflict, a dangerous foe out to reclaim their glory, the Tion Cluster. In order to understand what led to the Tionese War, we'll have to briefly cover the exploits of Zim the Despot. Back in the year 25,100 BBY, there was an area of the Rim territory known as the Tion Cluster. This was a collection of star systems which were under the control of powerful pirate lords. The Perlemian trade route ran up the Republic and right through the Tion Cluster, but neither the Republic nor the Tionese had explored the full length of the trade route, thus keeping it isolated from one another. Zim the Despot, though, was a pirate prince who greatly expanded Tion space through a series of raids and conquests. During this time, he would end up running into the Hutts and would challenge them to an organized war. Zim's war with the Hutts lasted a grand total of 3 major battles. 3 battles where the Hutts managed to either outsmart or outgun him at every single turn. Eventually Zim was defeated and his empire fractured. As a result, the Tion Cluster was now a splintered region of competing states. However, they had risen from the ashes of shame and brought themselves back to glory. Long ago, Tion had been populated from the descendants of an ancient human explorer group that had journeyed off of Coruscant, along with of course some other alien races. They believed that they were the cradle of humanity, not Coruscant and not the core, and that they took lots of pride in Zim's accomplishments. But since the time of his death, a millennia prior at this time, the Tionese people had fallen from glory. Their states were more or less a collection of feudal kingdoms ruled by pirate kings struggling to maintain order and power. They had grown tired of enforcing their will at the end of heat beams and beam tubes and wanted to establish a proper statehood. As an aside, a heat beam was a gauntlet-mounted weapon that produced a highly focused and a sustained beam of energy that burned and melted a target away completely. A beam tube was the archaic ancestor of the blaster, requiring a backpack power cell coupled with a large and a heavy gas reservoir. They were clumsy, unwieldy, and dangerous weapons, but were extremely effective for the time, firing an energy particle beam that had a range of about 50 meters and enough ammunition for around 100 shots. Zim had been one of the first to employ these weapons in a widespread military, and the Tion cluster continued to use these weapons ever since. Anyway, there were only two things that united Tionese culture: the love of wealth and the hatred of external enemies, the worst of them being the Hutts. But when the Republic traders arrived, the Tionese greeted them with severe jealousy. While their technology has stagnated since the era of Zim, the Republic ships were faster, more reliable, and could travel much further than anything that the Tion cluster had developed. This was thanks to the collaborations from many different civilizations of the Republic. But both the Tionese and their old enemies the Hutts saw the young rich worlds of the core as ripe for exploitation. The Hutt raiders and the slavers would at once begin striking from the shadows to steal colonies, to seize cargoes before quickly retreating back into Hutt space. The Tionese, however, wanted more. Their sights were set on the Republic's superior hyperspace technology and their entire worlds. And it just so happened that the Republic lied at the end of the Perlemian trade route, which made this hyperlane an ideal invasion corridor, one that led right to the door of the Republic. At this point, the Republic exploration ships were lightly armed, and they were no real organized fleets or warships. When the traders came, they had expected the same warm welcomes and friendliness that they largely got from other civilizations of the time, but this left them completely vulnerable to the predatory Tionese. They had ships bristling with plasma cannons, torpedo launchers, and despite having inferior technology, they were much more heavily armed. Finally, they were encouraged to take advantage of the naivete of the Republic, and were first met by emissaries from Decevro. The planet had once been the mightiest world of Zim's empire, and one of the main engines for his expansion. They too were a hungry people, desperate for more conquest, and so they struck an agreement with the Tionese once more to conquer the Republic, and to take their worlds. Under the leadership of Decevro, the Tionese began reverse engineering the captured Republic technologies, and began building their own war fleet. The drumbeat of war was now rhythmically beating across the stars, and yet no one from the Republic could seem to hear it, even despite the warnings from the mysterious Jedi. Up until this point, Ossus, which had been set up between the Republic and the Tion cluster, had been quietly guarding the young Republic since joining. Up until now, they kept their distance from the core worlds, but had secretly been working to thwart Hutt's schemes against the Republic, and to keep the Tionese divided. But the Tion cluster uniting under the bloodthirsty leadership of these people, the Jedi rushed to the core worlds to warn the Republic of an impending attack. They were unsuccessful, however, to say the least. These strange mystic warriors with their glowing swords did little to catch the attention of the Republic, until it was far too late. War fleets ripped out of the hyperlane, encountering little resistance. Several worlds on the fringe of the Republic rapidly fell to their might, and the Tionese gained new ships with each and every victory. Belatedly aware of its peril, the Republic embarked on a hasty program of warship production, but by now, it was too little, too late. Convoys of Tionese raiders continued to thrust forward, attacking famed shipyards and leveling them. This had been accomplished with the dreadful new weapons that the Tionese had developed, known as pressure bombs. Pressure bombs were powerful airbursts released from weapons whose heat storms and shockwaves carried the capability to raze entire cities. They might be considered some of the earliest superweapons in Star Wars, in fact. One of the first worlds to suffer their wrath would be the industrial planet of Exum. Same with the world of Perlemia. Pushing deeper into the heart of the Republic, the Tionese rained pressure bombs down on heavily populated planets of the Alaskan, and even targeted Coruscant itself directly. Finally though, they were repulsed by a desperate counterattack, one comprised of ships drawn from numerous core systems. Shipyards at Corellia, Rendili, and Humbrain began churning out warships to protect their society, to protect the Republic. At last, the Republic began to effectively organize. But the war was far from over. This set up an absolutely grinding series of offensives and counteroffensives all the way up and down the hyperlane route. The war lasted for nearly a century, and the worlds on the trade route became armed camps, all living in fear. During this time, some of the Republic merchants got very smart though, and decided to negotiate with the Hutts directly, stirring them up against their ancient rivals. This forced the Tionese to fight a war on two fronts now, one that they were ill prepared for. While they were trying to crush the Republic, they now also had to guard against the surprise raids and the pirating from the Hutt Empire as well. The Jedi had thus far refrained from entering the war officially. They had been quiet guardians in the past and used subtle methods of espionage to keep the Tionese off their game. But with it coming into an all-out war now, the Jedi were far more apprehensive to join. They remembered their days on Tython and what open war had done to them and their entire world. The dark side of the Force lurked around every single corner, waiting like a Nexu to pounce on any Jedi who would give themselves over to the thrill of battle. Because of this, the Jedi grew increasingly concerned that the galaxy would sink into barbarism without their intervention. Peace, security, and common decency demanded a guiding hand by the Jedi. And so following an agonizing internal debate, the Jedi Order entered the war as Republic commanders. In the final decades of the war, something became clear. It was clear that the Tionese effort had been doomed from the moment the Republic was able to put their industrial might behind their military. But nearing the end of the war, the struggle of the Tionese had turned from one of conquest to one of survival. Between the marauding Hutts and the technological superiority of the Republic, the leaders of Tion realized that their culture faced total annihilation and extinction, and so they continued to fight on. This time not out of arrogance, but out of panic and desperation. They subjected the worlds of the Republic and its citizens to repeated sneak attacks, raids, and terrorist attacks. These motions radicalized the Republic as well, as they would adopt a strategy of total war. The Republic stormed the Perlemian trade route and launched ships immediately into the Tion cluster. They too had synthesized the pressure bombs and decided to give the Tionese a taste of their own massive weapon. The Republic bombarded 5 key worlds of the cluster, absolutely devastating the planet of Desevro. In fact, Desevro specifically faced some of the worst of the Republic's punishment before offering their unconditional surrender. But their surrender was remarkably refused by the Republic. Enraged at the lives lost and driven by their total war mindset, the leaders of the Republic had made a drastic decision to sterilize the world to teach the Tionese a lesson. This cruel and bloodthirsty move disgusted the Jedi Order, and this immediately caused the Jedi to break away from the Republic. The Jedi had joined the effort to stop the civilization from falling into utter chaos, and now lines were being crossed, sinking into barbarism. But that was what ended up winning the day anyway: annihilation of life. And the Jedi now realized that they had been an accomplice. After very intense meetings above the devastated world of Desevro, the Jedi agreed to resume their duty as watchmen to ensure the Republic's safety around the Tion borders. But they decided that they would no longer be the Republic soldiers. The assault on the Republic turned out to be the Tion cluster's last grasp at galactic superpower, and now they had been utterly demolished. In the time that had followed the Tionese War, the cluster became just as much a part of the Republic as the core worlds were. However, those systems soon regarded the centralized Republic military as a great danger. They had feared another sweep of bombardments out of revenge. But with the Tionese threat officially put in check by both the Republic and the Jedi, the core worlds of the Republic voted to disband the standing military and return its units to the control of individual systems rather than one large conglomerate. However, not all were happy with this change. Many of the Rim-Ward worlds rejected this, as they had seen the most destruction at the hands of the Tion cluster during the war. But their concerns were overruled by the core worlds, and at last, the Jedi's self-imposed exile from the Republic concluded. The tide of expansion had reached their homeworld of Ossus, and the Jedi decided to play a formal role in the Republic's defense from now on. And not only this, but they also decided to act as guiding advisors, hoping that they could stop future wars in the process. And the Jedi slowly evolved to what we know them as today, although not quite yet. And now we reach Chapter 3, the Crisis of Unity. The year was 20,000 BBY. This marks the beginning of the Great Manifest period. The expansion of the Republic could not be stopped, which would incite a span of time lasting well over 10,000 years. But this was a time marked by unrest and even war. By now, the core and the inner rim had been fully established. This period of time would mark an increased movement in the Rim-Ward territories of Slice, which became known as the Expansion region. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the Tong species have finally found the world that they would call home forever, and they named their world Mandalore, in honor of their leader Mandalore I. These warrior people then conquered the planet's fierce mythosaur, and modified the creature's hulking skeleton to make entire cities made of bone. For a while, things were going extremely well for the galaxy, at least until the year 17,000 BBY, which was the start of the Indecta Era. This year saw the beginning of a very long series of clashes known as the Alsakan Conflicts, the world of Alaskan, attempted to usurp Coruscant as the capital of the Republic. At first, the stage of their battle was in the economy and politics, but it was not long before actual shots would be fired. Things did not quite erupt into a full-fledged civil war, as this was mostly an internal struggle between the two planets which took place largely in the expansion region of space, and not among the core worlds. The Alaskan conflicts were not simply a single war, however, as they would actually attempt 17 separate uprisings between the years 17,000 and 3000 BBY. So we will go ahead and summarize the nature of the conflicts and major events now. The conflicts were largely born from socio-economic tensions based on the geography of the growing republic. Two major hyperlanes began and converged on Coruscant, the Perlemian trade route towards the east and the Corellian run towards the south. And then you had the Slice, which is the triangle defined by 3 hyperlanes. This was essentially the cradle of civilization during this era. Because Coruscant rests at the fulcrum of these major lanes, it naturally receives its claim as the capital and its position, making it the most wealthy and powerful planet in the entire galaxy. In fact, it is numbered 000 on galactic coordinates, being the very center of the galaxy itself. The Corellian run continues through Coruscant, becoming the Metelos trade route. Together they form a single, continuous hyperlane, one that was at one point known as the Spin. The Spin connected many planets together in the core and the outer rim as well. In the days of the early Republic, this was the backbone. Each world connected by the Spin was a highly urbanized and a bureaucratic mega-world. The Perlemian trade route is not a part of the political geography of the Spin, as those two hyperlanes only intersect at Coruscant. But the planet of Alaskan is rimward of Coruscant and lies on the Perlemian trade route. It was the only planet between Coruscant and the rest of the sectors connected by the same route. In essence, Alaskan serves as the gateway between the capital and the trade route itself. The sectors along the Perlemian were heavily humanoid dominated, while the urban worlds of the Corellian run were more diversified in their species. Also in this time was amid growing economic and political competition among core worlds. Alaskan became the champion of those human-dominated sectors, all of whom envied Coruscant's privileged position and influence over the worlds of Corellia. As a result of its powerful position, Alaskan defined the culture and values of those along the trade route, and their values were this. They did not regard the Republic as the perfection of civilization that many believed that it was. These powerful individuals instead saw a limited economic and a political union. Alaskan was aristocratic in its values and desired local independence away from the Republic. They cared little for bureaucracy or mass-produced goods other than warships and blasters. Thus, the very young Republic was divided between two very different civilizations, each born from a separate hyperlane. And in that uneasy balance lies the origin of the Alsakan conflict. In the year 17,000 BBY was the first of these, which began as some colonists from Alsakan were seeking distance from authority when they established small colonies in the Inner Rim. But at this same time, the Spin's great trading conglomerates, which called themselves the Grand Companies, pressed into the Slice, looking for more raw materials and wealth. Refugees displaced by the Grand Company's activities began flooding into smaller Inner Rim colonies. Along with this, brought the Perlemians' attention to the wealth of raw materials that the Slice now contained. That year, Alsakan led the worlds of Perlemian into moving south to block the Grand Companies, while claiming the resource-rich worlds in their path. Of course, the powerful companies objected to this, and they armed their freighters to the Duros merchants and clashed with the Ascani warships. The Republic decided to back the Grand Companies, which in turn turned into a trade war, a bloody shootout at that. But it would not be a long conflict. Peace was eventually forced by the Bureau of Ships and Services, which controlled the hyperspace beacon system of both the Perlemian trade route and the Corellian run as well, making them extremely powerful. They threatened to withhold access to hyperlanes if the war continued. And because of this, the Chelat Compromise was formed, which temporarily would put peace in place. The Alsakan people continued to sponsor settlements across the Slice towards the Corellian run, attempting to seize more control of raw materials, and the conflict would continue. Another war was now brewing as a result of this, and Corellia was caught right in the middle. Corellia was sympathetic to the Alsakan, but had deep ties to the Grand Companies. They would end up inserting a clause into the Galactic Constitution, calling it the Contemplanus Hermen, which gave Corellia the right to withdraw from the Republic if the two sides reopened hostilities. But this first conflict would set a pattern which would continue for a cycle for nearly 14,000 years, and that cycle would go like this. Alaskani nobles and the Coruscant-backed megacorporations competed for resources, both wanting large pieces of the expansion region. with Corellia protecting its own interests while avoiding choosing sides in the war, declaring neutrality whenever the first shots were to be fired. While all of this was happening, a very different development occurred on the world of Arcania. Their geneticists began what would be the first of many experiments on sentient populations. Arcanians were known for their fascination with genetic science, and now they had taken it to the next level. They would end up taking a sampling of the six-armed Zeto people and changed it into an entirely new species on a different world, giving birth to the Chimerian species. The Chimerians were much larger than the Zeto and had long necks, 4 arms rather than 6. Their homeworld of Kermia was bereft of natural predators, allowing the Chimerians to evolve into a peaceful society concerned with only the ideas of philosophy. Around the year 15,500 BBY was when the Chimudan era was about to begin, and this would kick off with a curious discovery that would lead to a great destruction. In this time, Republic scouts would make first contact with the Dween Wogween, or more commonly known as the Star Dragons. Having never seen such creatures before, the scouts reacted in fear at the sight of 50-meter-long dragons that could fly in deep space and breathe atomic fire. Their encounter went disastrously, presumably with the scouts opening fire on the typically peace-loving and insightful species. Hundreds of the species followed this fleeting scout ships back to Coruscant, and they promptly waged a war on the capital. This event was known as the Dween Wogween Contention, and it resulted in a vast destruction of the Coruscant city. Luckily though, the Chancellor at the time, Philo Reen, brought an end to the war, brokering peace with the philosopher of the species, a dragon by the name of Borsmato. In the aftermath of the war, the two would found the University of Coruscant, and their statues would be erected in the very front of it. As a side note, it would be around this era as well that the Jedi developed the Proto-Saber, the archaic ancestor of the lightsaber that required a physical cable in order to feed energy from a power pack worn on the belt. Concurrently in the galaxy, the Hutt Empire had also fallen during this era as a result of the event known as the Hutt Cataclysm. The cause of the cataclysm remains unknown, but the cataclysm was a civil war between the Hutts, which left their homeworld of Varl, along with the other ancient Hutt colonies, as nothing but lifeless wastes. The Hutts had established a council of elders to prevent clan rivalries from erupting into open warfare, and instituted a brand new philosophy, called the Kajadik. In a basic sense, it was a philosophy that rejected outright war, and even territorial conquest as methods used by lesser species. Instead, the Hutts would rule through criminal enterprise, and would conquer through the use of slave races rather than going out and doing it all themselves personally. Unlike the usual crime syndicates that operated in secret, the Hutt clans operated in the open, claiming leadership over dozens of worlds in view of the Republic. In celebration of this brand new way of life, the Hutts began raiding and enslaving Republic colonists that bordered their regions of Hutt space, pushing their luck. This reopened the call for a centralized Republic navy, which the Senate voted in favor of this time. The time ends with the Mid-Rim being firmly settled, and the Republic and the Hutt in an era of great hostility. The next event that swept the galaxy would be the Pius Dea Era, which began circa 12,000 BBY. This era goes down in infamy due to the Pius Dea Crusades, which happened as a result of a corrupt cult gaining control of the Supreme Chancellor's office. The cult was a monotheistic religion that worshipped a deity simply known as the Goddess. Members of the Pius Dea adhere to a strict moral code emphasizing human centrism and spiritual purity. They associated the Outer Rim with chaos, and believed that they had a divine mandate to defeat that chaos, and in return, they would be given treasures and divine secrets. In reality though, they were simply a human supremacist cult. The Pius Dea regarded many alien species as inferior beings, and even a threat posed to the human civilization of the core worlds. They viewed their military conflicts against their opponents as crusades, with the ultimate intention of gaining spiritual and galactic purification. This would all come about during a period of 1,000 years, wherein the Chancellor's office was put under the repeated control of men and cult members that would take upon them the moniker of Constipex, infiltrating the Republic much in a similar way that Sidious would in the centuries that would follow. The Constipex dynasty, or the Pius Dea era, begins with a man known only to history as Constipex I. Constipex I came from Coruscant and rose to prominence in the Merchants Guild. becoming known as a legendary man for his devotion to the Pius Dea religion. He also had a stark opposition to vices and corruption, and he had an intolerance for anyone who didn't share in his impossibly high standards. The Senate had deemed this man a natural choice for cleaning up the internal corruption that had gripped them during the previous years though, and embraced him fully. The former chancellor was impeached, and then assassinated in the year 11,987 BBY, of course by Constipex, who would then assume the office for 40 years. He had called for communities to remain incorruptible by policing themselves, and purging their members of all corruption, putting them to death. Of course, this corruption was not always so much about bad behavior, as it would be the types of people in their communities that they didn't respect or trust. Typically, non-humans. Constipex began teaching these fallen communities that they should be resorted to purifying themselves, purging their unsavory elements. But before an entire millennium of madness had ended, such purgings would take the form of a series of brutal crusades. Crusades in which millions of alien species would be judged as unredeemable and sentenced to extermination. The first of these terrible crusades would occur in 11,965 BBY under the direction of Constipex I, who had launched a preemptive strike against the Hutts in the Outer Rim. One of the few good things that he did though. Under his successors, it would not just target the Hutts. Dozens of these crusades would be launched, and death would follow, spurred forward under the rallying cry of the goddess wills it. Although the Hutts were to be the first targets, other alien civilizations would follow until the Pius Dea turned against species whose loyalty was to the Republic. And finally, they even turned against human worlds accused of collaborating with the unredeemable. Constipex's first overhaul of Republic government gave his fellow members of the Pius Dea an inordinate amount of economic and militaristic power. At the same time, he purged all those who refused to convert out of the Republic way. Within a generation, important government posts were entirely reserved for cult members, with government duties becoming ritualized expressions of their power. By the time he stepped down, and his son Constipex II took over, the Pius Dea cult effectively controlled the entirety of the Republic. Once they were secure at the top of the Republic bureaucracy, they sought to purify the entire galaxy. Witch hunts began with exposed aliens in the Senate, and inquisitors were dispatched to root out supposed heretics and apostates. Those found were either exiled or imprisoned, their property was confiscated for auction, and their families blacklisted from being able to join any political or military positions for up to 3 generations. This would put an end to many of the powerful ancient Republic dynasties and extremely strong families which held the core worlds together for centuries. Going to the Jedi of this time, the Jedi Order struggled to find the correct response to the madness of the Pius Dea rule. In 11,933 BBY, the Jedi once again separated from the Republic officially, and declared itself no longer subject to their rule. The Jedi retreated back to Ossus, and distanced themselves from the cult-infested Senate. The move would set off several centuries of debate within the Jedi Order's ranks though, causing many Jedi to split off into splinter factions. Some radical Jedi took matters into their own hands, and carried out unsanctioned missions against the cult, while the Jedi Order largely decided to look the other way. Some even sided with the cult and became their champions. But most of the Jedi sat out these crusades, despising the cult but unwilling to take up arms against the Republic, which they had sworn to protect. The Jedi Order's hesitation only allowed the cult to grow stronger, and to take their insanity even further though. The Navy became their long arm. They would use their power to convert mid-rim worlds to their way, making them servants of the goddess. Defeated populations were allowed to retain their autonomy by converting to the Pius Dea religion, and individuals were only ever allowed to move freely between worlds if they joined the military. By the year 11,500 BBY, the Pius Dea cathedral ships darkened the skies of millions of worlds, all commanded by missionaries and crewed by the descendants of their original naval crews. They continued their push into the galaxy, purifying all in their sight, and whenever worlds were revealed as impure according to their deep standards, the Navy would advance and deploy troops by the millions. These soldiers who emerged alive from the grinder of trench warfare had demonstrated their purity to the Pius Dea, and them and their families were rewarded greatly. Meanwhile, plunder from countless worlds were ferried back to Coruscant by the Navy. This was a dark and a cruel era filled with death and sadness. This would all continue on for about 1,000 more years, until an unlikely alliance would form against the Pius Dea, taking us to the year 11,100 BBY. Shockingly, the world of Alaskan and many of the planets that they controlled had since seceded from the Republic at some point around 11,000 BBY. Vulnerable planets near Alaskan had begged them for protection, and this would begin what is known as the Sixth Alsakan Conflict, which was a vicious war between the Alaskani and the Pius Dea controlled Republic. But an unlikely alliance occurred when they opened communication with the Duros, the peaceful but also the hulkingly strong Herglics, and of course, the Hutt Empire. The Alliance had put aside their differences due to the absolutely horrific acts happening within the Republic, and the Hutts get to be the good guys. Around this time, the Pius Dea finally finished their crusades, but were now internally purifying the colonies, and even targeted the core worlds themselves now. The supposed impure were condemned and destroyed in mass trials, instigating something akin to a holocaust against certain alien species. Also during this time, the kind-hearted Kamasi species, from whom the Jedi had learned the skills of diplomacy from eras long past, rushed to the world of Ossus with a desperate plan. They pled with the Jedi Order to come out of their exile and to do something about the cult. Under the leadership of a brand new Grandmaster, Biel Ductaves, the Jedi agreed at long last that something had to be done. But what they would have to do was extremely drastic. In order to save the galaxy, the Jedi would be forced to remove the Chancellor from office, as well as suspend the Senate, and effectively take complete control over the Republic. This is a similar course of action that would be proposed by Mace Windu in 19 BBY, and the very thing that Palpatine accused the Clone Wars Jedi of considering, and now we know there was a historical precedent for this. But we'll address that later. For now, the Jedi were resolute in saving the Republic by any means necessary, but they too would need some help. The strongest part of the Pius Dea was their religion, their fanaticism. Attacking this would be the key to success. And so, the Kamasi would mastermind a secret heretical faith to be spread amongst the members of the Pius Dea, a faith that stoked into action by the Alaskani and Jedi agents in secret. It would be a slow process, but playing the long game was the only way that they would win. In 10,967 BBY, their plan would actually begin to pay off. The heretics made themselves known, and the ranks of the Pius Dea were sundered. The generational warships, cathedrals, and the governmental offices witnessed terrible battles between the faithful Pius Dea members and the heretical new branch. And a new civil war would officially be stoked. The Alliance moved in for a swift strike from the shadows after the Pius Dea were weakened. The combined force of the Alaskani battlecruisers, backed by the Jedi privateers, and even vessels that were piloted by the Herglic, the Duros, and yes, the Hutt slave species attacked the Pius Dea strongholds. In this new war, it would be the worlds of Ixtlar, Fondor, Cerelia that would be the first to fall. This stuck a massive blow to the cult-controlled Republic, as these planets had held the most distinguished strongholds. The Bureau of Ships and Services was one of the few galactic institutions that had not been fully infected by the cult, however, so when they heard of the actions of the Alliance, they too decided to abandon their neutrality in order to purge the galaxy of the disease that was devouring them. The Bureau would secretly seed the Pius Dea warships with rogue navicomputer codes. Then, when they sent out a signal, tens of thousands of Pius Dea cathedral warships leapt into hyperspace, and they would never be seen again. Sabotaged. And within a year, the war was over. The final battle was fought on the world of Uqueen, and the last of the Pius Dea vanguard emerged at the world of Uqueen under fire from a fleet of heretic battleships. Completely blindsided, and without operational defense systems thanks to the Bureau, the cathedral ships were helplessly destroyed in the battle. The Jedi led by Grandmaster Ductaves seized Constipex XIX aboard the bridge of his flagship, the ship named the Flame of Synthara. He was then tried for his crimes on the world of Kamas, and imprisoned there until his death. Meanwhile, the Jedi Order had done what they had said they would, seizing control of the office of the Chancellor, with Biel Ductaves becoming the first, and the only Jedi to serve as both Grandmaster of the Order and the Supreme Chancellor. Ductaves rebuilt the Republic under the guidance of the Force, and within a few generations, the Pius Dea faith had been essentially completely eradicated. But the surviving Jedi that had sided with the cult would go on to form the Order of the Terrible Glare, but they would never really cause any major problems or any substantial issues for the Jedi or the Republic, as they simply weren't strong enough. As for the cathedral ships that were rocketed out into the unknown regions of hyperspace though, they emerged into the unknown regions with their navicomputers wiped clean, as well as their engines and communication systems completely disabled. Aboard these doomed cathedral ships, the faithful were free to pursue their mad dreams of purity, crawling towards distant stars that they would never reach, and thus ended the Pius Dea Era. However, all of these events only served to deepen tensions between the core worlds and the rim worlds. From this period of time in 9000 BBY, the galaxy have entered the Tionese Era, named after the Jedi Grand Master and the Supreme Chancellor, the Jedi who worked tirelessly to make the Republic livable again. It was during this era that planetary defenses saw a great deal of development. Planetary shields and turbo lasers became commonplace in the galaxy. This had been in response to a very brief threat in the year 10,000 BBY that took the form of the Kumari Empire. Val Kumari was a warlord that had designed and built a line of legendary battleships that were the terror of the ancient galaxy. These massive capital ships were capable of planetary bombardment using drivers that could launch asteroids at surface targets. At the height of its power, the Kumari Empire spanned over 30 systems in the Outer Rim. However, this empire would be short-lived and would be quickly absorbed by the Galactic Republic. This was due to the main weapon being rendered obsolete by the widespread use of planetary shielding. Ultimately, the Kumari domain was defeated and eventually really forgotten, although the Kumari's legacy lived on through his battleship design, which would prove influential in space warfare for centuries to follow. Following this would be the Rhiannotus period, which lasted from 9000 to 8000 BBY. This fascinating era was remembered for the 275-year-old reign of Bloatus the Hutt. Bloatus served as the Supreme Chancellor of this era, and Bloatus had defeated all of the typical stereotypes of the Hutt species. He was known as being fair, a very just, kind leader. In fact, Bloatus became one of the most distinguished persons to ever hold the Chancellor's office, as he led the Republic into a period of prosperity and unparalleled acceptance. When Bloatus granted tax breaks to independent merchants, trade would prosper within the core worlds, and the Republic capital of Coruscant enjoyed substantial economic growth during this period. At the end of his term, Bloatus died a peaceful death in his sleep at the age of 912. He was remembered with so much affection that his favorite seat in the lounge of the Senate building was purposefully left vacant for thousands of years. But while we wish that this era of prosperity would last, the Subterra period in the 8000 BBYs would see another strain in Republic relations. A new mapping of the galactic southern quadrant would yield supply lines linking the galactic disk to the satellite galaxy of the Rishi Maze, wherein lies the planet that we all know very well, Kamino. These territories expanded the Republic's reach into the mid and the outer rim systems, but their inaccessibility promoted lawlessness in these areas of space. This would stoke an erosion of Coruscant's authority, officially beginning the feelings of separation that the Outer Rim would have in the Republic's core. In the lore, this is also said to have attributed to the darkness which began to sweep over the galaxy. The Pius Dea had certainly been a nightmare to deal with, but the nightmares had only just begun. From the dark side of the Force would be awakened a new threat in the year 7000 BBY, cursing the galaxy as the origin of evil officially began. Chapter 4: Dark Crucible. The Mandaron period would kick off with one of the most star-shaking events in all of galactic history, the Second Great Schism. Within the ranks of the Jedi Order, a master by the name of Ajunta Pao would discover a way to manipulate life itself. His abominable practices required the use of the dark side, but he believed to have discovered a greater understanding of the Force than any Jedi before him. He would gain a vast following in the Jedi Order, following in the footsteps of his predecessor Zendor. The Jedi deemed the ways of this new wave of Dark Jedi to be heretical and ordered them to cease all activity. But instead, the Dark Jedi would split off from the main order and would use their newfound abilities to wage a war of monsters, death, and darkness on the Jedi. Unlike the First Great Schism, the resulting war would indeed involve the Republic as a whole, as these Dark Jedi had their sights set much wider than those that came before. They did not simply want to destroy the Jedi way, they wanted to dominate and become masters. Because of this, the Republic would back the Jedi Order to defeat these nefarious armies, but the Dark Jedi would not be so easily destroyed. For an entire century, the Republic and the Jedi fought against the Dark Jedi threat in an event now known as the 100-Year Darkness. During the war, a Junta Pal and his followers would twist life itself to create hordes of hideous monsters for their army. Some less, some great. The greater of these beasts would be the alchemically created leviathans birthed by the Dark Jedi Sor's sin. These monsters were huge, hulking, powerful enough creatures to smash giant barricades. But not only this, they could suck the life force of sentient beings, holding them forever in what is known as skin blisters. The war blackened the galaxy in darkness and evil. But thankfully, there were more Jedi than there were Fallen. Using sheer numbers as the advantage alone, the Jedi and the Republic were at last able to corner the Dark Jedi. And at the titular Battle of Korbos, only 12 Dark Jedi now remained, and a Junta Pal surrendered. With lightsabers pointed at their backs, they were marched aboard a ship to be exiled into deep hyperspace beyond any lighthouse networks that they knew of, both a prison and a death sentence. However, with the call of the dark side, Sor's sin navigated their ship to the Stygian caldera located deep in wild space. There, the Dark Jedi would come to rest on a world known as Korriban, home to the Sith pure-blooded species of the time. After successfully integrating within their society, the Jedi exiles became gods to the primitive but powerful people, and they became the first Dark Lords of the Sith. With unlimited resources and a willing slave army, the exiles forged the Sith into a new empire, bringing about what is known as the Golden Age of the Sith. While separated by the Republic by the vastness of space, the Sith Empire was allowed to flourish in total isolation. At some point around the year 5300 BBY, there would be a war recorded between the Sith and the Republic. This war was spurred on by the Dark Lord Tulak Horde. Unfortunately, the circumstances and events of the war are largely a mystery, as only 2 records of it even exist. The only thing we know is that there were battles held at the inner rim world of Yin and the outer rim world of Kabosh. At the Battle of Yin, Tulak Horde single-handedly broke a Jedi siege on a Sith stronghold, and at the Battle of Kabosh, Tulak performed a ritual, one that drew the strength of his enemies into himself. Tulak's campaign stopped short here, however, and he was assassinated by his apprentice, Ortan Sella. With his death, and without the Dark Lord's powerful fist now guiding the war, the Sith were beaten back, and they retreated deep into the caldera. For some reason, records of this war were wiped out, and it is not well remembered by either the Jedi or the Sith. We believe that it was because Tulak was too powerful to be recorded, but we digress. Around this time, the Tong had now returned to the Republic as well. The Tong were now calling themselves the Mandalorian Crusaders, and would begin to harass some settlements in the colonies region. They sparked 2 rather small skirmishes, one known as Pathander Fury, and the other known as the Nakat Incursions. Neither of these events are well remembered in detail though, but it would be the first brush with the Republic that the Mandalorians would have. And now we reach the period known as the Mandaron period. This would last until 5000 BBY. During that time, the Corellian run now extended all the way from the core to the very edge of the known galaxy. What was once known as the Spin was now a part of one of the contentious hyperlanes known as the Corellian Trade Spine. The merchants of the Tapani sector established what would later be known as the Rima trade route. This hyperlane, coupled with the Corellian trade spin, opened up new paths into the galactic southern quadrant that had not been open prior. The Outer Rim was now being opened up as more sectors would join the Republic en masse. It was a time of rugged frontiers. Pioneers established homes on harsh new colony worlds, and alien races encountered humans for the very first time. Convoluted paths through the wilderness of hyperspace were still being mapped, which made long-distance travel treacherous and uncertain. But one fateful trip into a long-distance jump would change the course of galactic history forever, instigating the event known as the Great Hyperspace War. In 5000 BBY, brother and sister hyperspace explorers by the name of Gav and Yinchorri Uprising would attempt to map out a new trade route, one in order to get themselves out of financial debt. Gav Daragon was force sensitive, but not enough to become a Jedi initiate. He would actually use his force sensitivity, which he believed just to be luck, and would trailblaze a new path through hyperspace. But this time, the 2 travelers would plunge deeper than they ever had before, hoping to earn enough credits for a decent livelihood. They succeeded in skipping straight through the Koros system, now in the deep core, all the way into Sith space, and the Stygian caldera. At the time, forging an unknown route that we call today the Daragon Trail. The explorers would stumble upon Korriban quite literally. landing on the world right in the middle of a funeral procession being carried out for the legendary Sith Lord Marka Ragnos. At this point, the Sith Empire had enjoyed a fattening time of prosperity, being cut off from the Republic. The Dark Lords relied on powerful weapons and rituals based out of sorcery and magic. But their empire had reached a time of crisis. Marka Ragnos' rule had been long and glorious, but after his death, a power vacuum had now sparked a great struggle. The brewing civil war threatened to tear apart the entire Sith Empire, and right at the center of it all were the two most powerful lords of the Sith of this era, Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh. As Ragnos was laid to rest among the towering tombs, the two Sith entered mortal combat, a blood duel over their ideologies. Sadow was more liberal-minded, believing the time had come to expand Sith powers in order to avoid stagnation. His rival, Kresh, was far more conservative. He didn't want to risk an action that would cost the Empire everything, a war that they were ill-prepared for. Kresh believed that they would not be able to destroy the Republic if a war did indeed arrive. And the two were now dueling. It was upon this scene that the Daragon twins stumbled on by sheer accident. The Sith Lords seized Gav and Yinchorri, believing them to be Republic spies. The Sith Empire then imprisoned them on a nearby world of Ziost, and immediately called a meeting of lords. Ludo Kresh saw them as precursors to an invasion, but Naga Sadow had a different idea. Sadow viewed the unsuspecting Republic as the next prize for the Sith. Sadow needed to gain the position of the Dark Lord of the Sith first to do this, and in order to complete this, he had to enact a cunning plan. Naga sprang the Daragon twins from captivity with the help of the Massassi warriors, and spirited them away to his own isolated fortress. But at the scene of the prison break, he used Republic weaponry from the Daragon ship to leave behind evidence that made it look as though the Republic had freed them. In the next Dark Council meeting, Sadow played on the fears of the other Sith, using the so-called evidence of the Republic's meddling in their empire. This stoked the flames of the Sith to vote in favor of making a strike on the Republic, and electing Naga Sadow as the reigning Dark Lord. After this event, Sadow would make a major mistake, allowing Yinchorri to return to the Republic, but would place a tracking beacon on her ship, one that he would be able to follow along with her. Sadow would also keep her brother Gav back at the Sith Empire, wanting to train him in the ways of sorcery and the dark side. His sister Yinchorri was aware of the invasion, however, and made it her mission to warn her homeworld of the attack. Back home on the Koros system, Yinchorri managed to get an audience with Empress Tita. Empress Tita, who was the ruler of the 7 worlds of Koros. The Empress's advisor, a Jedi scholar by the name of Odan had been having visions of the Sith's return, and he had warned the Empress to heed the young explorer's story and warning. Empress Tita at once began rallying support from the leaders of Coruscant and preparing her armies for defense of the Republic. The Jedi Odan would raise the alarm bells to the Jedi Order, who then spread word throughout the Republic itself. Soon, Sadow set off a surprise attack against the vulnerable Republic while they were still in the midst of preparation for war. His entire fleet had followed Yinchorri's ship back to the Koros system, and with weapons blazing, conflict spread across the Republic like a storm. A succession of battles that pitted Republic fleets and Jedi Knights against Sith warships and sorcery. Empress Tita herself proved to be a talented commander and warrior. She was known by her people as the Warrior Empress due to how she had consolidated all 7 planets of the Koros system under her united rule. But the Sith were powerful as well, unpredictable, deadly. The initial phase of the war went badly for the Republic, and they were sent on the retreat. Back in his Sith meditation pod, Naga Sadow had used sorcery to make his fleet look twice as large as it actually was, providing an intimidation factor that almost allowed him to win the day entirely. The Republic's last stand was a combined fleet around the star of Primus Golod, but in the next battle, Naga Sadow had placed Gav Daragon in charge of all of his forces, duping him into facing the Republic alone. Sadow's real plan, though, was to use his meditation chamber from a safe distance away to make the star of Primus Golod go supernova, wiping out all of his enemies in one fell swoop. However, Gav redeemed himself by switching sides and getting his friends out of dodge before the star exploded. With his plan stopped, Naga Sadow fled back into Sith space on his flagship, going directly to Korriban. But Empress Tita's forces were hot on his trail, not wanting the Sith to escape. Meanwhile, the Jedi defeated the Sith armies of Coruscant, and the Jedi Master Odan won an important battle on the world of Kirik, though the victory cost the life of his Jedi Master. Now, while Naga Sadow was fleeing, Darth Vitiate had rallied over 8,000 Sith Lords to his world of Madrias, under the guise of performing the ritual to unleash the power of the dark side itself, to have it seep over the Republic like a dark tsunami. But when they all arrived on the world, Vitiate dominated their minds through the Force. He then puppeteered their bodies, forcing them to participate in a ritual that drained all life and energy from both the Dark Lords and the entire planet. The power fed into Vitiate himself, granting him extended life and godlike power. Vitiate then departed for Korriban and declared the Great Hyperspace War a failure to all who would hear. He gathered a great amount of his Sith people, the survivors of Korriban, ferrying them into his ships, and blasted off deep into the unknown regions to begin a new empire of his own. Upon Naga Sadow's return, he would not only find Korriban largely bereft of life, but the only thing waiting for him was the entire Sith fleet of his old rival Ludo Kresh. Ludo Kresh mercilessly attacked Sadow, calling him a traitor, and at the same time, the Republic exited hyperspace behind them and crushed the Sith fleets of Sadow and Kresh in the crossfire. Taking his flagship, a ship by the name of the Corsair, Sadow took his most loyal Massassi and made a run for it. He managed to fake his death and break out of the battle, heading for the remote moon of Yavin 4. With the Sith threat vanquished for now, the Republic claimed total victory. The Jedi would then storm over all of Korriban, as well as other Sith worlds, carrying out a purge of any and all darkside knowledge that they could find. Every artifact was looted or destroyed, all Sith teachings were to be burned, and all historical records buried. A lot of Sith knowledge was lost during this time, which is why we have such difficulty pinning down when certain Dark Lords lived, or what they did during their reign. At this point though, the Jedi were none the wiser that the Sith had actually survived under the rule of Vitiate, and was growing back in the deep unknown, bringing them to power on the world of Dromund Kaas. Following the Great Hyperspace War, the Jedi were invited to live on the planet of Coruscant, and the Republic officially dedicated to them the Sacred Spire, a large mountain which rose above the planet-covering city. Unbeknownst to all but the Jedi though, the mountain contained a powerful light side nexus. The Jedi would begin building monasteries and smaller temples on the slopes. They would also develop the modern lightsaber, which could operate independently of a power pack. We here at the Archives suspect that they were able to develop it so quickly because they found schematics from the Sith tombs beneath. The Jedi exiles of the year 6900 BBY are documented as using modern lightsabers despite being in an age of proto-sabers, so they likely had the schematics stored in either holocrons or scrolls. It is our theory that the Jedi found these while raiding the tombs of Korriban, and so they used them to perfect the lightsaber. These brand new weapons would be seen during the terrible event known as the Gank Massacres in the year 4800 BBY. The Duros of Cato Nemoidia had by this time evolved into a race distinctly different from their predecessors. They now called themselves the Nemoidians. They discovered a real spice on the Twi'lek homeworld of Ryloth, and so to pounce on the wealth, lock down distribution rights. However, a new species called the Porporides ended up getting heavily addicted to this new substance. So addicted in fact, that the Ryle spice wiped them out in a homicidal frenzy. The Republic attempted to stop the Porporides by sending the Jedi Knights and military there, but they withstood everything that the Republic used. The Nemoidians, terrified by this turn and for their safety, as well as their product, hired Gank mercenaries to protect them. Sadly, the Ganks decided that the best source of action was to exterminate the Porporides. After that, the Ganks embarked on a full-scale war against the Republic. At the time, Supreme Chancellor Vokatara was forced to commission the building of a Juggernaut war droid in order to end the fighting. However, it would be the Jedi and their newly constructed lightsabers who would put an end to the Gank massacres. During the next event, known as the Voltar Cataclysm of the year 4250 BBY, the Jedi Order experienced its third Great Schism. Following the Jedi Civil War on Coruscant, the newest Dark Jedi fell back to the Voltar system in the core. There, the Dark Jedi would discover ancient technology created by the mythical Celestials. The technology indicated that the Volar system planets were actually artificial constructs, the same as the Corellian system, and the Dark Jedi then planned to harness the machines in the Voltar system for their own power, a new weapon that they called the Cosmic Turbine, a device capable of manipulating gravity on a mass scale through the use of hyperspace tractor beams. However, the Dark Jedi quickly learned that they could not control the power of these ancient technologies and unleash a destructive force that annihilated themselves and the entire planetary system. Not too long after this, 4 masters would establish the first level of the Ziggurat, which would soon become known as the Jedi Temple of Coruscant. The Jedi and the Republic would then get a brief reprieve from the dark side of the Force, but unfortunately, not all problems would cease. For a while, the Republic had kept an eye on the Mandalorians, lest the Crusaders get in their head they could start attacking the core undisputed. But ever since the 2 minor run-ins that they had during the Mandaron period, the Mandalorians had remained beyond the frontier for the most part, pursuing their own mysterious goals away from the Republic. Republic traders kept their distance from Mandalorian space, but the few who did venture in returned to the Republic with worrying news. While the clans were prone to internal war, many of them rallied behind their one leader known as the Mandalore. They had also now perfected some new strong warships, edged weaponry, and even rocket jump packs. But the real problem began when the Tong religious reformation began, which saw the cease of worship of a deity and instead held the concept of war itself as divine. According to Mandalorian legend, Mandalore the Indomitable had a vision while on the mysterious world of Shogun and returned to the clans with the revelation that it was their divine right to lead a series of crusades against the Republic. In 4024 BBY, the Crusaders raided the Republic's central systems, beginning with the planet of Nivota in the colonies. Over the course of a 3-year campaign, the Mandalorians ultimately exterminated the native species there. It had happened with such a swiftness and efficiency that the Republic either did not know or had not been able to react to it. And by the year 4017 BBY, the Mandalorians made it into the core worlds and waged war with the planet known as Basilisk. The natives were completely overrun and decided to flood their world with deadly toxins rather than surrender it to the Mandalorians. But while the Crusaders were unable to conquer this world, they took with them a game-changing new technology while they fled: the Basilisk war droids. These war droids were sentient techno-mounts riddled with weapons that could bond with its rider like an organic beast. This would be a huge development for the Mandalorian culture as a whole for centuries that would follow. Concurrently, in 4015 BBY, the Great Droid Revolution would take place as initiated by HK-01. This may have been one of the attributing reasons why the Republic was so slow to respond to the Mandalorians. HK-01 was the original prototype of the HK series assassin droid model, which the Zerka Corporation had manufactured to circumvent the outlaw of assassin droids. However, he was designed a little too efficiently. HK-1 ended up gaining a measure of sentience and independence, and eventually escaped the laboratories and secretly reprogrammed thousands of droids from across the galaxy. Miraculously, he was able to infect the entire droid population of Coruscant, from small industrial sanitation, protocol, astromech units, to battle droids such as the Juggernaut war droids which served as a security force. HK-1 had it in his mind that he was liberating them from their organic owners. He would even modify the central computers of capital warships, as well as artificial intelligences that helped administer entire star systems. Using a coded signal to control other machines, HK-1 activated the rebellion. The droids turned on their owners, starting to behave in a violent and an unpredictable fashion. Legions of Juggernaut war droids indiscriminately killed organics, giving rise to fear and sentience from across the galaxy. In the name of the rebellion, battle droids invaded and subjugated entire planets of the Republic, allowing HK-1 to seize power on Coruscant and even thousands of other worlds. After the initial onslaught, armament designers developed ion weapons that allowed the Republic forces to push back against the droid armies. And eventually, the Republic and the members of the Jedi Order traced the signal that HK-1 was using to orchestrate the entirety of the uprising. It would be Master Arca Jeth that would end the madness, when the Jedi used the Force to short-circuit the assassin droid commander. After the Great Droid Revolution, droids were often viewed with deep suspicion, fear, resentment, and attitudes that continued to last for centuries against them. Droid construction and use was also subsequently subjected to extensive regulations. This would halt production of combat droids for the next 20 years, and unfortunately, it also caused issues for the very thing that HK had been fighting against: There have been debates ongoing for the rights of droids for almost a millennia now, and some were arguing that the droids being fully accepted as sentient beings was the best way. But the shock of the Great Droid Uprising caused a very long halt to all of these discussions. If only this had been the end to the horrors though. But this was only the beginning. The reprieve from the dark side was brief, and now it had come to an end, for the Sith have returned. Chapter 5, Reign of the Sith, Part 1, The Great Sith War. There was a time in the galaxy when darkness did not simply rise, it ruled. It began with quiet whispers from the past, ancient tomes, and feelings of morbid curiosities. But no one was prepared for what these simple things would bring upon the innocents. For 3 entire generations, the galaxy would know no peace. Not through the lordship of Exar Kun, nor through the Mandalorian Crusades, nor the betrayal of the Jedi Civil War, or the silent devastation of the Dark Wars. One conflict would bleed into the next, each more insidious than the last, all building into a time when the Jedi and the Republic withered into near extinction. In this day, the light waned and the night reigned. This time there would be no silver lining. It all began on the world of Onderon, where the famous Beast Wars of Onderon had just now concluded. The Jedi Knight Ulic Qel-Droma, his brother Kay Qel-Droma, his lover Nomi Sunrider, and a few other Jedi had just put down a local power grab. In the process though, they uncovered the dark side influence of a long-dead Jedi turned Sith Lord by the name of Freedon Nad. Upon succeeding in their mission, the Jedi Master Arkajeth used Force Light as a technique to seal Nad's corruptive spirit into his sarcophagus and had him shipped to a nearby moon, the moon of Duxun. But although the moon was intended to be his final resting place and his prison, it only served to create a dark side nexus. Freedon's spirit would end up corrupting 2 nobles visiting the Koro system, which was known as the Empress Tita system. These two, a brother and a sister duo by the name of Seital and Alima Kito, were obsessed with darkside artifacts. They had founded an entire cult around the collection of them that they called the Krath. Using Sith relics and knowledge, they would orchestrate a coup in the Empress Tita system, instilling in their own regime to rule it. The two had gone mad with their newfound power, and were eager to test their abilities with darkside magic. And the perfect way to test that would be to test their mettle against the Jedi. They sent out an army of battle droids to launch a surprise attack on a large Jedi enclave on the world of Deniba. During the ensuing battle, Ulic Qel-Droma would watch the legendary Arkajeth pass on and die. Filled with grief over his beloved master's death, Ulic would vow to infiltrate the Krath's ranks and to take them out from the inside. However, while he was undercover, his treachery was quickly discovered and he was captured. The Krath then tortured the Jedi with darkside potions that they had learned from Sith tomes, and soon, Ulic Qel-Droma succumbed to the dark side. Although he managed to kill Seital, he was under the influence of Alima Kito, and now led the Krath alongside her. Meanwhile, on Dantooine, a prideful Jedi student by the name of Exar Kun had become fascinated by Sith history despite the warnings of his own master, Bodo Siosk Boss. Rejecting his teacher's advice, Exar followed the shadow of the Sith of Duxun, wishing at first only to learn more about the Sith Order. But upon meeting the spirit of Freedon Nad, Exar was directed to the Sith tomb world of Korriban. There, the spirit of Nad tricked him and forced him to open himself up to the dark side of the Force in order to survive a deadly trap. Barely surviving, and now in the throes of darkness, Exar Kun went to the world of Yavin 4, where he managed to take the amulet of Naga Sadow, using it to obliterate the spirit of Freedon Nad once and for all. The true Dark Lord has arrived. But now hopelessly lost in the dark side, Exar subjugated the Massassi natives of Yavin, the descendants of those who once served the great Naga Sadow, and made the Jungle Moon his home base. But although he was the new Lord of the Sith, he was aware that he was not alone. He had rivals in the dark side, and so he ventured off of Yavin to take care of them. Bursting into the palace of the Empress Tita system, Exar made his presence known by dispatching Alima with his superior power in Sith magic. He and Ulic then contested with one another in a blazing clash of the lightsaber, recorded as one of the most evenly matched duels in the entirety of Star Wars lore. But during the duel, both of the amulets they wore began to shimmer and glow with energy. Suddenly before them awakened and appeared the spirit of the long-dead Marco Ragnos, being summoned by the two sister amulets and the dark side of the Force now being channeled through them yet again. He commanded the two fallen Jedi to cease fighting and to join forces so that they could bring about a new golden era. a new era of prosperity and wealth for the Sith, the one that Naga Sadow had squandered. Now allies, Exar and Ulic clasped hands and vowed to do anything necessary to bring about the dark future, to bring about the Great Sith War. Some time would pass until the day of 3996 BBY. During those years, Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma consolidated their forces and converted many weak-willed Jedi to the way of the Sith. Exar went to Ossus personally, spreading his insidious teachings and demonstrating his power to convert as many naive Jedi as he could. While there though, Exar would also steal a holocron used by Naga Sadow, killing the hero of the Great Hyperspace War, Master Odan in the process. Exar took his new Sith converts back to Yavin, where he would train them further in the ways of mastering evil. Meanwhile though, Ulic Qel-Droma had taken over the war that the Krath had already begun with the Republic, but he was interrupted by the surprise attack of the Mandalorian Crusaders. Led by Mandalore the Indomitable, they had attacked the Empress Teta system. Ulic at first was confused, as his enemies made no demands, nor did they try to pillage the rich stores of carbonite from the Empress Teta system, the riches that they were known for. Soon the Sith were discovered their reasoning was beyond anything involving wealth. He knew the true reason when Mandalore the Indomitable challenged Ulic Qel-Droma to a one-on-one duel. The war, the battle, the blood was the goal. The Mandalore had heard of Ulic's reputation and desired to do combat with him, one who he considered to be a worthy opponent. Despite odds being stacked out of his favor, Ulic met Mandalore's challenge and eventually defeated him. Mandalore would swear fealty to him and became Ulic's most loyal and devout follower, dedicating command of his Crusader forces to Ulic in the process. The Mandalorians and their Basilisk war mounts, augmented by Ali Makito's sorceress illusions and the Krath warships, began executing lightning strikes against the Republic. Their plan was to launch crippling blows against important shipyards, and in the chaos and shock, immediately head straight for Coruscant to bring a swift end to the Republic. Battles erupted across the stars, beginning with the shipyards of the Kemplex system, Belderone system, the Vento system, and the Perlemian trade route. They struck at the Tionese manufacturing world of Raxus Prime, and would even conquer the ancient Sith planet of Thule. It was here when Ulic Qel-Droma took control of the Sith superweapon known as the Dark Reaper. The Dark Reaper used the dark side of the Force to drain the souls out of entire armies. The Sith won many battles with this grim, terrible weapon and strategy. They had the battle expertise of the Mandalorians, coupled with the terrifying and mind-splitting illusions of Ali Makito, and utilized the Dark Reaper to drain the life energies of thousands of Republic troopers. There was just no one that could stand against them. They also had made a pact of non-aggression with Hutt Space, so they wouldn't have to worry about the gangsters getting in their way either. Fascinatingly, Ulic Qel-Droma and Exar Kun seemed to have done their homework, and were now using the improved strategies of the previous enemies of the Republic, while avoiding all of their critical mistakes. Tion was wise in making lightning-fast prodding strikes, but forgot to take care of their old enemies, the Hutts. And so Exar and Ulic made sure to forge a pact with the Hutts so that they wouldn't have to fight a war on two fronts. Naga Sadow had the right idea of making a surprise spearing attack on Coruscant, but the Sith neglected to cripple the Republic's resources and their allies first, and believed that he could swiftly destroy the Republic in one fell swoop, underestimating the Jedi Protectors. The new Sith not only were wise to break the knees of the Republic industrial power first, but they also used the Jedi themselves so that they knew how to distract them, to throw them off the trail. Finally, the time would come for an all-out strike on Coruscant. The capital was vulnerable, and nothing stood in their way. The plan was going extremely well, until Ali Makito had decided to betray Ulic, seeing him as a threat to her power. The attack would have succeeded, but Alima recalled Mandalore the Indomitable and forced him to order his men into a full retreat, leaving Ulic Qel-Droma alone on Coruscant, surrounded by Jedi. Ulic was captured by his friends, who surrounded him with the light side. However, Mandalore's undying loyalty pushed him to obsessively review the Coruscant battle plan. The honor of himself and his men deserved to know why their perfect attack had failed so completely, and he ended up discovering Alima's lies, and immediately told Exar Kun everything. With a sigh of annoyance, Exar went to go rescue Ulic from his impending trial. During Ulic's sentencing, the doors crashed open, and Exar strode in, flanked by his Massassi guards. His shadow stretched impossibly tall before all of the lesser beings that now beheld him. Before the entire Senate assembly, the Dark Lord of the Sith used his power to hypnotize them, to freeze them all in place. He forced them to watch as he struck his fingers into the skull of the Supreme Chancellor Sidrona and used him as a flesh puppet. Using his magic, he forced the Chancellor to say that the Republic was crumbling. It was an outdated, useless institution. And he announced the return of the Golden Age of the Sith. Before he released the Chancellor, the old man fell to the floor dead. He then freed Ulic and was about to depart before being stopped by his former master, the Jedi Vodo Siosk Boss. The master wanted a duel. It was here when Exar revealed his perfection, the double-bladed lightsaber that he used to murder his former master. Exar and Ulic then departed the Senate building, and the Jedi behind as well to return to Yavin and prepare for the next wave of the war. By now, the Republic had finally been able to recover from the shell shock of the initial strikes and made a bold counteroffensive. But the problem was, most of the strikes carried out by the Mandalorians and the Krath were simple distractions. The real target had been Coruscant the entire time. But with that plan now failed thanks to Alima, it was time for Part 2. The second phase of the Sith strategy aimed to capture and incapacitate governmental and military centers, as well as targeting sites that were strong in the Force. Without their Jedi defenders, the Republic would be helpless against the Sith attack. And so, Exar Kun stepped up for his part of the war. He would create monstrous predators of Sith alchemy, the main force of which being Terrentatex. Terrentatex were rancors mutated by the dark side to have spikes and venom-dripping tusks, along with the thirst for Force-sensitive flesh and blood. Using these creatures, the Sith raised Jedi outposts on Kashyyyk and Tatooine, before making a strike at Ossus directly. While all of this was occurring, Exar hashed an insidious plan to crush the Jedi once and for all. He would dispatch his Sith disciples to go across the galaxy to find and assassinate their old Jedi masters and teachers. A new purge would begin. All of these events happened in such rapid succession that it sent waves of disturbance through the Force itself, as the Force began to cry. But not even the Jedi were quick enough to react for what would happen next. Exar and Ulic were aware that Alima Keto needed to go. Her disloyalty could no longer be tolerated, and their plan had simply outgrown the need for her. So Exar decided to kill two Minox with one stone. He gave her command of Naga Sadow's capital ship, the Corsair, which was armed with a superweapon that could draw out the energy of stars to use in its weapon system. She was told to go destroy the 10 suns known as the Kron Cluster, not realizing that her companions had set her up for failure. The chain reaction triggered by the weapon incinerated her as it did all the stars as they went supernova, sending a blazing shockwave from the exploding stars directly towards Ossus, exactly as Exar had planned. During the frantic evacuation of the Jedi's homeworld, the Order scrambled to retrieve as many vital artifacts and pieces of knowledge as possible. Amid the chaos, Exar and Ulic were attacked, and while Ulic led the invasion force, Exar raided the library to retrieve as many valuable artifacts as possible that could help bolster his Sith forces. Exar was unable to get everything, however, as the Neti Jedi Master Ud Banar buried a stash of ancient lightsabers before Exar died. He drew upon the power of the living force to become an invincible tree that would stand over the lightsabers and Jedi knowledge forever, protecting it from the Sith, and the scorching wave of destruction headed right for the planet. As the heat of the blast of the supernova drew closer, Ulic Qel-Droma fought against the rallying Republic and Jedi forces. His brother Kay, desperate to stop his fallen brother, entered a duel with him, but he was simply no match for his superior Sith. In a moment of destructive fury, Ulic became intoxicated with the call of the dark side, and struck down his own brother, killing him with one swift blow. But upon seeing what he had done, Ulic collapsed in grief and despair. Unfortunately though, Nomi Sunrider had seen the entire horrendous act, and in the Jedi's distress, she unleashed a wild version of Force Light that would blind Ulic to the Force completely, effectively stripping him of all of his abilities. Utterly crushed, and no longer a Sith or Jedi, Ulic's eyes were finally opened to how much pain and destruction he had caused. With a change of heart, he offered to take the Jedi to the moon of Yavin to stop Exar. And as the Jedi left to put an end to this madness, they watched as the surface of their homeworld was set ablaze by the stellar inferno. Across the galaxy, the Mandalorian Crusaders had also launched a daring attack against Onderon, but their assault had failed, and they were forced to retreat to the moon of Duxun. Mandalore the Indomitable was left alone in the jungle, and would be torn apart by wild beasts. The Sith were crumbling. By now, Exar had summoned all of his Massassi slaves to his temple and was conducting a final ritual to free his spirit from his body, hoping to achieve infinite power by being unchained by any mortal restraint. The Jedi Order all arrived in ships and came together to collectively use Force Light to interrupt Exar Kun's terrible final plan. Exar succeeded in shedding his mortal flesh, but instead of having his spirit unleashed upon the galaxy, the Force Light confined him to being imprisoned within the walls of his dark temple for time and all eternity. Though the Republic had almost reached its finest hour, the day was not completely won yet. For the entire war they had been on the back foot, and it wouldn't be the last time. But for now, the Republic and the Jedi were able to rest, having beaten back the blackening darkness that nearly consumed them. The Jedi, however, were the ones who truly had to retreat and to lick their wounds. With the Great Library of Ossus now completely obliterated, they relocated their order to the world of Dantooine, establishing a Jedi enclave there. But the order was now severely weakened, and a worrying high number of their members had been killed in the Great Sith War. But this wasn't even the worst of it. Much of their precious knowledge had been lost in the devastation of Ossus, but as the order attempted to put itself back together, they had a lot of hard work to go. The hideous creatures of Sith alchemy that were created by Exar still roamed the stars, sparking into action an event known as the Great Hunt, a Jedi effort to purge the galaxy of specifically the species known as the Terentatek. The Jedi were on cleanup duty, taking care of the monstrosities that still roamed many of the Rim worlds. But this dragon quest would require a lot of Jedi resources, as the Terentateks were each a match for an entire squadron of Jedi Knights. For about 3 years, the Jedi would go around to many worlds such as Onderon, Yavin, Tatooine, Kashyyyk, and even Korriban to exterminate the Sith spawn, those that threatened the lives of innocents. 3 renowned Jedi spearheaded this hunt, and each of them would be killed or would go missing during each of their missions, showcasing the brutality of the Sith monsters. Not willing to risk more Jedi lives that they could no longer afford, the Jedi High Council abandoned the hunts entirely and deemed them to be too dangerous. Instead, they decided to focus their efforts in building up their numbers, aiding the Republic in its own rebuilding effort. It was time for the Jedi and the Republic to unite. During this period after the Great Sith War, the Jedi would undergo significant reformations. The Council sought to hold Jedi Masters and Watchmen to higher standards of accountability, and implemented more uniform practices across the entire Jedi Order. No longer were Jedi going to be spread out and living their own lives until called into action. Instead, all members would live collectively at the enclaves that surrounded the galaxy, at specific temples. However, not all members of the Jedi Order agreed with these reforms, and the Council faced a prolonged struggle in establishing unquestioned authority. Tensions emerged as differing viewpoints created divisions within the Order, and while the Republic viewed the Jedi Council's stricter governance as a good thing, many Jedi accustomed to a more flexible hierarchy considered the Council's reforms as overbearing and intrusive. The Republic entered what is known as the Restoration period, which was a thankfully peaceful era of around 20 years. The Republic was basically on the verge of collapse during this time. Exar had come within a hand's breadth of succeeding in destroying the Republic, and a group of politicians, led by a new Supreme Chancellor, Tol Kressa, decided to put into an effect a series of motions meant to restore the Republic to its prior strength. By guaranteeing the various corporations throughout the galaxy safe passage and trade along space lanes in exchange for commercial investment in the Republic's infrastructure, the Republic was able to rebuild its military quickly and provided a much-needed goods to the people of a devastated galaxy. Also in this time, hyperspace explorers once again began to scout the stars, seeking to discover newer and safer worlds and hyperlane routes. And now we have reached Part 2, the Mandalorian Wars. The time to rebuild would be brought to a screeching halt as the chanting of vengeful warriors once more echoed between stars. The Mandalorians had spent the many years since their humiliating defeat plotting to come back greater and stronger. They had a new leader, Mandalore the Ultimate, who claimed to have a religious epiphany similar to Mandalore the Indomitable. The Ultimate decided that the Mandalorians should actually hold the territories that they pillage, rather than simply raiding and moving on. In this way, the Mandalorians would be able to establish a mighty empire of their own from which to launch even more devastating conquests against the Republic. What's more, is that he expanded what it meant to be a Mandalorian. No longer were the Tong the only ones that could join their ranks. Any who proved themselves in battle and upheld the Mandalorian warrior code were full members of their clan. This caused their ranks to absolutely explode, to swell with humans, leading to the formation of the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders. Beginning in the year 3973 BBY, Mandalore the Ultimate initiated the first skirmishes of the Mandalorian Wars. The Republic had been so weakened by the Great Sith War that beyond certain borders in the Outer Rim, their existence was only theoretical at best. With precious few resources to spare, many of the worlds along the Mid and the Outer Rim were completely defenseless against the Mandos. Very slowly at first, Mandalore began conquering fringe worlds along the edge of the galaxy. They began attacking regions in the Tion cluster and outside of the Republic, transitioning them into clan territory and establishing the beginnings of a great empire. Soon the Mandalorians even began chewing away at the Hutt territory from the north as well. All the mercenaries and pirates the Hutt sent to repel them ended up either dying or even joining the Mandalorian cause. And as this happened, the Republic did absolutely nothing but watch. In some cases, they made a few half-hearted attempts to thwart the Neo-Crusaders, but didn't want to commit yet another war while they were still so weak. The Jedi, in turn, completely turned a blind eye, hoping that the situation would simply resolve itself. After all, the Jedi were not soldiers, and they had lost far too many already. But when you give the Mandalorians an inch, they take a mile. And the Neo-Crusaders took mile after mile, until the Mandalorian Empire was larger than even the entirety of Hutt space. But with the Republic showing apathy towards their actions, the Mandalorians continued getting bolder. And after about 3 years, they finally plunged into the Republic space by attacking Ithir 3, an industrial planet that gave Mandalore the Ultimate another productive planet to build his war machine. After which, they would assail the world of Cathar in an attack so brutal that it would turn everybody's head. The Cathar people had opposed the Mandalorian clans as best they could, but Cassius Fett, the legendary warrior, had been sent to crush them underfoot. Using the Basilisk war mounts, Fett decimated the Cathar's primitive settlements before lining them all up in the ocean and having the Mandalorian army open fire, massacring them all on the spot. Only a single Mandalorian female tried to stop her brothers from doing this cold-blooded act, and she too was shot down alongside the innocent. On that terrible day, over 90% of the population of Cathar was murdered, leaving them on the brink of utter extinction. The Jedi, unaware of the Mandalorians' actions on Ithir and Cathar, continued to stall and refused to join the defense against the Mandalorian cause. Many Jedi wanted to, but their efforts were hampered by the ineffectual Council, a council that continuously called for caution and not war. Not wanting to dedicate their limited supplies of Jedi lives, they hindered the war effort with their hesitation. The Republic was deeply alarmed at the actions of the Mandalorians though, but still did very little to stop them. They would mobilize naval forces to protect Taris and its neighbors, which were all dangerously close to the Mandalorians' main stronghold on Duxun. But even after this, the Republic did little but watch and wait for an entire decade. In that decade, the Mandalorians continued to grow stronger, and soon, their big play would reveal itself. In 3965 BBY, the Neo-Crusaders began trading fire with Republic forces before launching a sudden three-pronged attack from their territory in the Galactic North. The Mandos broke the Republic line and invaded the world of Taris in full force. From their hold on Taris, they then skirted around the Republic's borders to attack Ithor, Ord Mantell, and Iridonia, doing so to position one part of their forces to the northwest of Coruscant. They then attacked Taris and Sirocco, scouring the poor planet with nuclear fire, obliterating the Republic's defenses there. From that point, the Mandos ravaged the elegant world of Noain. The sheer ferocity of this attack drew the Republic's attention to the Coruscant's northeast, but this was simply a feint, a trap. The third prong of the Mando attack swept in the underneath of the core, slicing through the Ares Onderon, Cato Nemoidia, and then to the core world of Duro. This hook placed the Mandalorians now also at Coruscant's southeast, as the Neo-Crusaders were perfectly poised for a pincer attack on the Republic capital world. But luckily, using Zabrak insurgents, the Republic was able to counterattack on Ithor and Iridonia as well, breaking off the pincer maneuver entirely. But to the galactic south, the Republic was able to stop their advance on Duro as well, now bringing the war to an agonizing standstill. The Jedi were also dealing with a massive struggle of their own. but this one would be a struggle of philosophy. A huge portion of the Jedi vehemently disagreed with the Council's refusal to be drawn into the war, arguing that the Order was allowing misery and terror to go unchecked. The Jedi movement was led by two charismatic knights by the name of Revan and Alec, who then went out to find proof that the Mandalorians were a threat to life and required Jedi intervention. The two powerful Jedi investigated the world of Aether and Cathar, staring firsthand at the Mando's ruthless massacre. Revan would end up finding the mask of the Mandalorian female who had stood between her brothers and the lives of innocents, and in her honor, Revan placed the mask upon his face and vowed to never remove it until the Mandalorians were gone. His Jedi followers then called themselves Revanchists and followed Revan and Malak into joining the Republic's war efforts against the wishes of the High Council. Now promoted to generals within the Republic military, Revan took control of the war effort and plunged headfirst into a bloody scrap with Mandalore the Ultimate. Revan and Malak helped break off the Mandalorians' attack on Duro, arriving just in time with a fleet full of interdictors. In the process, Revan became known as a hero and inspired many more people to become conscripts in the Republic military underneath his command, causing the Council to despise him even more. This event also got Revan named the official commander of the Republic's entire military force. The ambitious young Jedi knew that the Republic would be the only one that would be able to make tough decisions, the only force capable in the entire galaxy to take out the Mandalorians, at least that he was aware of at the time. The first of Revan's decisions was devoting all of the industrial might of the Republic to defeating the Mandalorians, just as they had done back in the days of the Tionese War. And the second order of business was being willing to pay terrible prices for the cost of victory. Through sheer force and will alone, and an unwillingness to bend or compromise, the two Jedi smashed against the Mandalorian forces, using their own ruthless tactics against them. Revan was willing to sacrifice entire populations of worlds if it meant winning key victories elsewhere. He was willing to put hundreds of Republic soldiers' lives on the line if it meant securing victory, such as when he threw himself and his men into a meat grinder on Duxun, just to destroy the Mando stronghold. This earned Revan the grudging respect of the Mandalorians as well, and the growing contempt of the High Council. Revan continued to push the Mandalorians back until the year 3960, when he cornered Mandalore the Ultimate in a showdown on Malachor V. When the Jedi engaged Mandalore in a 1v1 duel aboard his flagship, Revan had his chief lieutenant Mitra Surik activate a Republic-made superweapon known as the Mass Shadow Generator. The device spawned a tremendous gravitational vortex that fractured Malachor V and destroyed the Mandalorian forces, but destroyed as well much of the Republic fleets that had assembled above the planet. In the battle, Revan would defeat Mandalore the Ultimate and would force him to surrender the Mask of Mandalore. But just before the Ultimate died, he informed Revan that he had been given the go-ahead to attack the Republic by a greater force, a Sith Lord. At last defeated by a worthy opponent, the Mandalorians destroyed their armor and war mounts under the eyes of Revan and Malak. This would mark a turning point in the clan's history, as many of the Mandalorians abandoned their cultural warrior way and became mercenary or guns for hire. Revan and Malak, meanwhile, went off deep into space, hiding the Mask of Mandalore so that the clans would not be able to be rallied underneath a single leader ever again, leaving them fractured. And thus ends the Mandalorian Wars. Part 3: The Jedi Civil War. Although Revan and Malak were hailed by the Republic as heroes, the two of them mysteriously would vanish for about a year following, ignoring the summons of the High Council. Revan had wanted to find out if Mandalore the Ultimate's claim of receiving orders from a Sith were real, and following a trail back to the world of Dromund Kaas, the two Jedi would be met with a horrifying discovery: the resurgent Sith Empire. Emperor Vitiate, who had taken the remnants of the Sith from the Great Hyperspace War, had spent the past millennium crafting a brand new empire, one stronger than the first. The two Jedi, bold and arrogant after their victory, rushed in to face the Dark Lord alone, unaware of his incredible power. Instead of killing them outright though, Vitiate dominated their minds and decided to use them for his own purpose. He twisted them to the dark side and sent them back to the Republic as the vanguard of his own invasion force. At this time, he was largely ignorant of the strength of the Republic, and Vitiate wanted to test their defenses, so he planted the idea in the mind of Revan and Malak to find the ancient Rakatan superweapon known as the Starforge, to use it to amass an army with which to attack the Republic. Returning to known space, the Jedi were now changed beyond recognition. They placed the Darth monikers before their own names and followed the trail of the star maps left behind by the Rakata. They moved across Dantooine, Kashyyyk, Tatooine, Manaan, and finally to Korriban, where they would end up finding the remnants of one of Exar Kun's Sith academies, still filled with Sith trainees ready for exploitation. The two new Sith Lords ended up finding the Starforge successfully, a space station with the power to use the Force and the energy of stars to create an endless supply of ships, droids, and weapons. But the Starforge was sentient, and it fed on the dark side of those that used it. Aboard the station, Vitiate's mental hold on Revan and Malak would eventually break, but as a result of their memories being fractured, they remembered nothing of their journey to Dromund Kaas, only that they were now Sith, and believed the mission to take control of the Starforge was their own idea. Revan decided that it was his mission not to destroy the Republic or the Jedi, but to remake them in his own image, to make them into something much stronger after the Jedi Order had failed so many times. Many of the Republic soldiers, crewmen, and even Jedi that had fought with Revan during the Mandalorian Wars would join their cause. Basically, all of the Revanchists joined for a chance to truly do some good under Revan's vision, and many in the military were simply eager to serve under two great champions once more. It was at the shipyards of Faux Rost, where Revan and his followers would seize control of a massive portion of the Republic fleet. This would officially initiate the Second Sith War, or what is more commonly known as the Jedi Civil War. Revan and Malak would take up Sith strongholds left dormant from the Great Sith War, officially establishing themselves as Dark Lords in the direct lineage of Exar Kun. Revan and Malak would revitalize the Sith Academy on Korriban in his honor, training up a new swath of Darksiders to defend the Sith Empire. They would also publicly announce themselves as Sith as well to the wider populace. But despite the name and the memory of Exar, many of the Republic citizens approved of Revan's take-charge mentality after the Republic had been so spineless at the beginning of the Mandalorian War and had lost much favor. This allowed Revan's empire to expand exponentially, primarily due to the Republic defections rather than pure conquest. At the zenith of his rule, Revan's empire swelled to being half of the size of the known galaxy, rivaling the full size of the Republic's territory itself. Revan had control of much of the Outer Rim, which included all the territories once held by the Mandalorian Crusaders, the Tion cluster as well, and the entire eastern portion of the Mid-Rim bordering Hutt space. Revan also controlled a few isolated areas of space within the Republic around the core in the Expansion region. Those worlds included Fondor, Duro, and Elantine. And things would only get worse. Once they got the Starforge into production, they bolstered their forces and drove the Republic to its knees. Many of the Republic were disheartened for having to face down their friends and family, and many of the Jedi were incredibly demoralized and were questioning the teachings of the Jedi way now that the best of their brethren had fallen so far. Revan's battle experience was running a roughshod over the Republic forces that he had once led, and Darth Revan and Darth Malak were quickly finishing what Exar Kun had started. And to make things worse, they were about to succeed in absolutely crushing the Republic once and for all. That was until the Jedi Council threw a Hail Mary in the year 3956 BBY. Bastila Shan, Master of Battle Meditation, helped prevent the total collapse of the Republic, organizing a trap for Revan in the midst of a fleet battle. Bastila and a strike team of Jedi boarded Revan's flagship and would duel the Dark Lord personally. They were aided by the treachery of Malak as an unlikely ally, who opened fire on his master's ship so that he could usurp control, as is the Sith way. But because of this, the Jedi were able to capture a now unconscious Revan. Desperate, the Council employed Force-induced amnesia in Revan's mind, hoping to bring him back to the light, purging all memories of his life entirely. Darth Malak, now the Dark Lord of the Sith, took his own apprentice and pushed ahead in the war effort. He wanted to find and kill Revan, as well as Bastila, whom he knew was still alive. His mad chase resulted in him leveling both Terrace and Telos IV with orbital bombardments and devastating the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine. Revan, Bastila, and a team of Jedi gathered allies and searched the stars for the star map, hoping that if they could strike at the Starforge directly, at the heart of Malak, that they could end the war and save the Republic. Over the course of this long journey, Revan eventually gained back his memories and his power. Eventually, he found Darth Malak at the Starforge, and the entire Republic would hold its breath as the two dueled in mortal combat. The Republic threw what little they had left of their fleet, and with the entire Jedi Council now backing Revan and meeting at the Battle of the Starforge, Finally, Revan put an end to his old friend's madness and destroyed both him and the superweapon, thus ending the Great Jedi Civil War. But now we have reached part 4, that we have titled The Dark Wars. Following these events, Revan was brought back into the folds of the Republic and once again was viewed as a hero, though this time with much caution. The Jedi reluctantly treated him the same way, but with the breach of trust evident, many in the Order ostracized Revan and held a grudge. The Order eventually relocated to the Grand Temple on Coruscant officially, and Revan was allowed to marry Bastila as a thank you from the Jedi. But the two of them lived outside of the Jedi Temple of Coruscant, far away from the judging eyes of the Council. In the wake of Malak's defeat, a power vacuum was left in the ranks of the Sith. And in 3955, this would mark the beginning of a series of conflicts known as the Dark Wars. The Dark Wars started off slowly at first, but once they gained momentum, the Jedi were once again powerless to stop them, and they would have no one to bail them out this time. The power struggles between the Sith remnant would lead to the Sith Civil War, when the Order tore itself apart. The Sith would fracture the strongholds of the once mighty empire that Revan and Malak had constructed, breaking off into smaller and weaker territories. The Jedi just sat back and watched as all of these Sith killed themselves, massacred each other. One of the last battles was fought on Korriban, where the Sith all murdered one another there, leaving the planet barren and lifeless. A true tomb world. The Sith Academy left empty, a shadow of its former glory. After the War of Red Blades quieted to a still silence, the Republic would send a cautious expedition into Sith space, hoping to root out the remaining forces and extinguish their light forever. However, they find it almost completely devoid of not just Sith life, but all sentient life. Little did they know though, the Jedi and the Republic were looking in the wrong place. From seemingly out of nowhere, 3 unimaginably powerful Dark Lords would rise: Darth Nihilus, Darth Sion, and Darth Traya. Each had been a product of the previous wars, shaped by the dark side, by death. Darth Sion had been a Sith both under Exar and under Malak. He was a man who loved battle so much that he refused to die when he was struck down. He harnessed his pain to put himself back together, stitching his wounds with hatred and ambition. He became the Lord of Pain. Darth Traya was a former Jedi, one of Revan's masters. Because of her radical philosophies though, she was blamed by the Council for Revan's fall to the dark side, as the Council believed that it was her fault. Full of bitterness towards not only the Jedi, but the light side of the Force in general, the woman by the time named Kreia would open herself up to the dark side on the world of Malachor V. But she was so overwhelmed by its energies that it drove her insane, and she became Darth Traya, Lord of Betrayal. But Revan's horrific plan on Malachor V had yielded yet another terror. The mass shadow generator that fractured the planet had created so much death and pain that it focused itself into a single individual, making them literally a walking wound. A wound in the Force. The man in whom it focused had become an insatiable entity with an appetite for Force energy, a man who would drain it from any being that he could find. This was no longer a man at all. This was Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger. Together, the 3 of them formed the Sith Triumvirate, with Traya teaching Sion and Nihilus the ways of the Sith, forming them into monstrosities of terror and pure power. They would float around the galaxy in a zombie Republic battleship that Nihilus had resurrected from the fleet graveyard of Malachor, haunting the galaxy like wraiths in the night. And soon things were about to get worse. Revan left behind for them a weapon, a sect of Sith assassins, all well preserved on Malachor V. The Triumvirate took control of these assassins, swept them across the galaxy, doing so with a single goal: the complete and utter extermination of the Jedi. The Triumvirate did not reveal themselves immediately at first, but would strike from the shadows at Jedi targets. It's worth noting that the toll that the Jedi Civil War had on the Order had been absolutely astronomical. Around this time, there were barely 100 remaining Jedi in the galaxy, and this would set the large stage for the Jedi Purge, the first Jedi Purge. While all of this was occurring, the hero Revan would once again mysteriously disappear. The one hole in his memory was his adventure into the unknown regions, and Revan had developed a terrible feeling that something insidious lay just beyond the Republic's reach. With a heavy heart, he left his wife and young child behind to go off and discover what had caused him to embrace the dark side originally. Revan would end up finding what he was looking for: the resurgent Sith Empire and Darth Vitiate on the throne. The hero Revan was not heard from again after this point, at least for not a very long time. This was the worst time for a champion of the Force to leave, as he would have no idea how much he was needed for the terrible events that would follow. The Sith Triumvirate manipulated events from the darkness, causing local conflicts on key Republic worlds. These worlds, if left to fall, would mean a quick and decisive end to the entirety of the Republic. And so once Jedi went out to solve these issues, they found themselves having to step into a trap. They did not expect to be met with Sith assassins, or Sith lords this powerful. Whether it was Lord Sion's assassins group, or Lord Nihilus feasting upon them, the Jedi were never heard from again. It was a dark and a chaotic time for the Order, as one after another Jedi began to systematically disappear. And they didn't know why. A steady stream of Jedi, including the Watchmen overseeing several planets, would step down, renouncing the Jedi Order entirely, and were never heard from again. That's how scared they were. Entire Jedi gatherings would begin to vanish, leaving behind a strange disturbance in the Force that only a few members of the Council could recognize. In this time, the Jedi began to suspect that they were being hunted, and at last, the Jedi Master Atris summoned many of the most powerful and influential members of the Jedi Masters that remained. She would call them all to a secret conclave on the Mira Luca world of Qatar, under the pretext of discussing the emerging threat. But the conclave was not as secret as the Jedi had thought. Master Atris leaked information about the conclave to the greater galaxy, in a desperate attempt to draw whoever was attacking the Jedi out of the shadows. And the foolish Atris would get her wish. It was her fault. Nihilus arrived as the Jedi assembled, and he would flood the entire surface of the world of Qatar with his power, draining the life from every living thing upon the planet. Both the Jedi and the Mira Luca colonists would die, and after the shocking event, the tiny few remaining Jedi and Council members decided that they would venture into exile. In doing so, the Jedi hoped that the mysterious and secretive new Sith Order would be lulled into a false victory and would fully reveal themselves, but that would not be for several more years. Without the Jedi to protect them, the Republic fell under the sway of the Sith. This was a truly dark time, as the Sith were now the dominant force. After all of the warring, the Republic had fractured and weakened until they could bear it no longer. And without the Jedi there to protect them, the reign of the Sith had began. We know very little about this period of time, however, or what the galaxy was really like, except that it was incredibly bleak. The people of the galaxy lived in constant fear as they were left unprotected by their government and by the Jedi who had disappeared. The Sith had proven that they could arrive out of nowhere like a specter from the dark, ready to consume all life and leave nothing behind in their wake. We believed that it was during this time where we would meet the 4 sages of Duarte. These were the people that Palpatine possessed Brosnium statues of within his office. They were Sistros, Nevet, Brata, Danlos, Phea, Rodemos, and Yanjon Zelmar. All we really know about them is they were a group of contentious philosophers and lawgivers from the early days of the Republic. They hailed from the planet of Noain in the Duarte system, and were controversial figures because of their political philosophies. They were cold, merciless, and they openly endorsed the study of the dark side. Despite how contested they were though, they had a heavy amount of influence as lawmakers. We figured that they had lived around this era because of the planet of Noain, as this didn't officially join the Republic until the Mandalorian Wars. And so, it was said that the Brosnium statues of the 4 stages that Palpatine owned were crafted by Sith followers during an era when the Sith were in power and when the Sith ruled. We at the Archives believe all this evidence points towards the 4 sages having lived during this 4-year rule of Darth Nihilus. Another development that would occur around this time was the widespread use of the HoloNet. The near-instantaneous communication network was commissioned by the Galactic Senate to provide a free flow of holographic communication and information exchange among any world that requested it. The way it worked is that millions of hyperwave transceivers were suspended in hyperspace that carried messages from one point of origin through hyperspace to a HoloNet relay. This essentially acted as a broadcast station which sorted, identified, and then routed the message to its destination. The hyperwave transceivers weren't actually in the hyperlanes themselves that people travel by, but they were in smaller hyperspace travel lanes called S-threads, which laced across the galaxy. This enabled data to be sent and received at faster than light speed, ensuring near instantaneous communication from any end of the galaxy to another. This vastly sped up galactic communications, which had previously depended on subspace transmission or relays, which usually meant the messages took days, weeks, or even months to receive. While we don't know exactly when the HoloNet was first created, we do know that by the year 3954 BBY, it was fully operational and used by the majority of the Republic. This is pretty incredible considering the time that they were living in was dominated by the Sith. Eventually though, salvation would come both for the Jedi and the galaxy in the form of Meetra Surik, the Jedi outcast. Having been scarred from the mass shadow generator's results on Malachor 5, Surik ended up cutting herself off from the Force. She was put on trial by the Jedi for her crime in following Revan during the war, and she would be officially exiled. But she ended up returning to the Republic, and would team up with several of Revan's friends to uncover the origin of the Sith plot. By this point, Kreia, now scorned by both the light and the dark, decided that her new goal was to destroy the Force entirely, to liberate the galaxy from its control. Kreia trained Meetra Surik, with Kreia hoping that she could use the outcast to destroy the Force itself. However, Surik took the path of the light and managed to overcome Darth Nihilus, utilizing his treacherous apprentice. After vanquishing Nihilus, Surik traveled to Malachor 5, where she engaged Darth Sion and was able to convince him to let go of his pain, and Sion too eventually passed to the Force. The final showdown happened when she and all of her friends confronted Kreia. Kreia, who was in the midst of attempting to liberate the galaxy from the Force's hold. Once the madwoman was put down though, peace was restored, and the Sith's grip on the galaxy was finally shattered. At long last, the Republic could actually breathe a sigh of relief. The shadow of the Sith had passed for now, and balance was restored. Dawn was breaking on the horizon as light began to return. The Jedi were then able to come out of hiding and to take their place back on Coruscant, where they would begin rebuilding the Order from scrap. Meetra would be very involved in the reconstruction of the Jedi, until she was called by Bastila Shan for help. Bastila, who was deeply worried about Revan, and begged Meetra to go and find him and to deliver him a message. Bastila was not able to go herself, as she was taking care of their toddler. Meetra would eventually follow Revan's trail until she too came upon the hidden Sith Empire. Revan had been captured by a member of the vicious Dark Council, and she made an unlikely alliance with a Sith Lord by the name of Scourge, and the two of them would go behind Vitiate's back and freed Revan. The group would discover the truth of Vitiate's power, how the Dark Lord had managed to drain all of the Force energy from the planet of Nathema and left it a gaping hole in the Force. And soon, Vitiate would desire to do the same to the entire galaxy. Terrified of the Emperor's madness and what it meant, Revan, Scourge, and Meetra decided to rush in an attempt to defeat him. However, Scourge had a vision that they would all perish, and that the duty of defeating Vitiate was not among them, one far in the distant future. Making a difficult decision, Scourge would betray Revan and Surik, striking them down and allowing the Emperor to triumph. Meetra would be killed, and Revan was kept in a stasis chamber. Vitiate would then establish a mental link with him so that he could extract information from Revan about the Republic, and perhaps turn him back to the dark side once and for all. However, the Jedi would cleverly reverse this mental link and use it to inspire paranoia in Vitiate, to hold him back from attacking the Republic for as long as possible. Revan and Vitiate's mind battled for centuries, and although Revan was kept and tortured for the next several centuries on end, he used every last bit of his will to hold back the Mad Sith Emperor, hoping that the Republic could gain enough strength to defend itself. The galaxy then enters a history of time remembered as the Inter-Sith War period, one of the few breaks that the galaxy actually has from the dark side and the Sith, as they are not seen for several millennia. This just lasts shy of 300 years, and the period of time allowed the Republic and the Jedi to become far stronger than they were before. But it was not without its own issues or developments. Around the year 3900 BBY, Queen Elsinore Dentacia of Grismalt was sponsoring one of her world's greatest colonization missions. 3 ships by the name of the Beneficent Tasia, the Constant, and the Mother Vima departed from the world and explored the galaxy for several decades on end, until they eventually reached the Gungan-controlled world named Naboo in wild space. The colonists became embroiled in a small skirmish with the Gungans before taking it over completely and renaming the world. Elsewhere, in the Kan sector of the Republic's frontier, Governor Miriel of Argzada was using the recent chaos of the Sith War to cover her attempts at establishing a militaristic dictatorship. Miriel's armies bombed uncooperative planets in the sector and enslaved their populations, and the Kan sector eventually seceded from the Republic and existed as a totalitarian state for the next 300 years. This would begin an isolated war known as the Khan's Disorders, which eventually required the Republic to become involved. More than 5 billion lives were lost during this war, until it was put to an end by a Jedi in the year 3670 BBY. But while that was occurring, on a more peaceful and a progressive development note, the legendary pioneer woman Freya Kalia completed her lifelong mission of finding a new Great Hyperlane. This led to the blazing of a new route known as the Hydean Way. The Hydean Way spanned from all the way from the galactic north to the south uninterrupted, thus opening up a gateway for new, widespread colonization between the slice. The second expansion wave, as it all came to be called, would fundamentally alter the scale of galactic civilization as we know it. This would officially settle the mid and the outer rim territories in their totality, and it was just in time for the next conflict that would grip the galaxy. This next war may be the worst of them all, for on the horizon the Sith Empire would finally return for a final time to settle the most monumental grudge match in galactic history. Chapter 6: The Great Galactic War. For almost 50 years, the galaxy burned. From the forgotten corners of the Outer Rim to the densely civilized populations of the core, the fires of vengeance reigned supreme. Like a malevolent phoenix, the resurrected Sith brushed the ashes of death. They shrugged off their defeat, and they breathed an inferno of rage upon the Jedi and upon the Republic. Empires clashed. Heroes rose and fell. Planets were won, only to be lost again. This was not a war of skirmishes. This was a total war. Relentless, merciless, and enduring. This was not merely a single conflict or even a collection of struggles. It was an era where entire ways of life faced extermination, and ancient truths would be rewritten. This was the war that tore the stars themselves apart, and it all began in the year 3681 BBY. Part 1: The First Galactic War. For more than 1,000 years, the Sith Empire consolidated its power on the remote world of Dromund Kaas, and its forces amassed considerable strength under the rule of its Emperor Vitiate. This was an entire civilization bred for war. They dreamed of the glorious day that it would march to battle the Republic. And finally, in the darkest of the unknown regions, a red lightsaber ignited. It then plunged deeply right to the heart of what was once Sith space, right at the homeworld of their people, the world of Korriban. It all began when the Sith Empire announced their return with the surprise attack on the Republic's blockade above their home. Reclaiming Korriban would greatly boost the morale of the reconstituted Empire, as well as become a symbol of the Sith's official return. In a move which caught the Republic defenders completely by surprise, a Sith fleet of over 30 warships launched on a massive assault of their long-occupied Holy World, a world that the Republic now laid claim to. Darth Vindican, his apprentice Darth Malgus, would enter a duel against the Jedi Master Cal Senderek and Satele Shan, two of the few Jedi who were stationed there to guard Korriban. The Republic quickly fell to the Imperial attack, however, but luckily, Satele managed to escape with her life, and devastating news that the Sith had returned. With minimal effort, Korriban was recaptured and brought under the domain of the Sith once more. This assault had been executed so smoothly, in fact, that the Jedi and the Republic wouldn't even learn of Korriban's loss for quite some time after. But the Empire did not rest easy at their first victory. They took advantage of their yet unknown presence, and went on a blitzkrieg attack throughout the entire Outer Rim world, the worlds in space known as the Tingel Arm region. This would win them a substantial slice of the galactic north right off the bat. With no way of knowing the depth and peril they were in, the Republic dispatched a small diplomatic team to find out what was happening in the region of space. The Imperial fleet waited for the diplomatic team to arrive in silence, and then allowed just enough time for the panicked diplomats to transmit images of the terrifyingly large armada of the Sith fleet, before the Sith utterly destroyed them. This bit of psychological warfare instilled the perfect amount of fear in the Republic and Jedi alike, who quickly began organizing their fleets for a counterattack. However, their fleet was led into a trap by Beldecan, and the Sith nearly destroyed the entire Republic fleet on that battle. The Sith then completed their big offensive with the destruction of the famous Sleus Van shipyard, which was where the Republic heavily depended on the majority of its ships. After conquering the shipyard, though, the Imperial Sith forces executed any civilian or government workers who refused to swear fealty to the Empire. All military personnel were hunted down and executed as enemies of the Sith. This had the Sith Empire positioned at the northern and the southernmost ends of the galaxy, repeating the pincer attack maneuver that the Mandalorians had once attempted, but now on a much larger scale. Despite the violence of their attacks, not all senators were convinced of the threat that they were facing. Some in the Senate argued that the attackers were simply from another upstart species who could be defeated easily once the military designed an effective strategy. The Republic was growing very strong in their hubris. This ignorance paralyzed the Senate with indecision though, and the Jedi by contrast took much more decisive action. As their ancient enemies of the Sith, the Jedi Order recognized the threat for what it truly was and immediately dispatched a force to defend the Minos cluster in the southern part of the Outer Rim, thereby putting an end to the two-pronged attack. The Jedi were not keen on repeating the mistakes of their hesitation before. This era's Jedi had been training for the day that the Sith would return, and so the Knights were battle-hardened warriors. The Jedi were equipped with the finest armor of the Jedi design and experts in lightsaber combat of this era. They hoped that their proactive approach would spur the Republic into greater action, and indeed, this was a success. After witnessing the heroism of the Jedi on the HoloNet front lines began to form at countless recruitment centers from across the stars of the Republic. The citizens did not want the past to repeat itself, and so they promised that they would defend and fight for civilization, no matter the cost. As the public clamored for action, the Senate came together and began proper planning for war as well. Though already having faced a number of defeats, the Republic rallied to the defense. Soon, the Republic rushed to the Jedi's aid as they dug into the defensive positions in the world of the Minos cluster. This would begin the Minos campaign that would last quite a while, as the Jedi managed to bring the assault of the Sith to a screeching halt. But it seems that both sides were unprepared for just how much fight the other one was putting up. The Sith had grown in power as well. Battles in the Minos cluster would go on for the next decade, with the Sith attempting a blockade of the Rimma trade route, which was the hyperlane on which the Minos rested, and with the Jedi attempting and failing to recapture Korriban back in the north, the war raged on. Elsewhere on the industrial world of Balmorra, the Sith Empire invaded and attempted to take the industrial asset for themselves, but the native Balmorians organized a sufficient resistance, fighting valiantly until Republic reinforcements arrived. The Battle of Balmorra would be one of the most enduring struggles of the entire era, lasting nearly 30 years. But in the decade, the Sith would not be deterred, and would win victory upon victory, steadily consolidating more power in the Outer Rim. Soon the Sith controlled a sizable portion of the galaxy equivalent to the size of Revan's former empire, and then they began to expand inwards towards the mid-rim systems. In 3670 BBY, the Republic would finally score their first big victory on the world of Boltawi, which would officially bring the Great Galactic War to another standstill. Admiral Greek had anticipated attack on the planet, and therefore they were able to beat back a hasty invasion force of the Sith. While victory was sweet and rekindled hope in the Republic, the Sith would return for a second assault. But with the planetary shield now installed over the world, the Sith were forced into a ground battle which would result in one of the bloodiest battles in galactic history. While the Sith managed to defeat the Republic the second time, the resistance from one Jedi Master by the name of Alusis had been so brutal that they had inflicted a lethal number of casualties on the Imperial armies of the Sith, forcing the Sith into a retreat, thus ending the second battle, officially concluding in what is now considered a draw. The result, though, would come to characterize not only this battle, but the eventual outcome of the war, as the Republic's only hope in the face of the new Sith onslaught was survival, but not victory. In the year 3668 BBY, Republic warships began mysteriously disappearing by the dozens. Republic intelligence learned that a group of Sith known as the Dreadmasters were using a form of battle meditation, a terrifying artifact to project terror on the crews of the Republic ships, making them flee in fear deep into space. A Jedi strike team would be assembled and to infiltrate the Dreadmaster's ship and to capture all of them. While they made a public announcement that the Dreadmasters had been defeated though, in reality, the Republic spirited them away to the prison world of Belsavis, Belsavis, where they were able to extract extremely valuable information from them. The war had been on for 13 years now, and the Republic only now learned that the Imperial capital was on Droman Kos, the Sith stronghold, a world unknown even to the Jedi archives. The Jedi also learned, though, that the Emperor was well over a millennium old, and was a survivor of the previous Sith Empire. With the Republic morale starting off well, though, the Empire knew that they needed to crush it in order to gain back that fear that they had at the beginning of the war. Their next target was the serene world of Alderaan, a beacon of hope for the Republic. In the war, it was currently being used as a training ground for injured elite troopers, and a bumbling group known as Havoc Squad, led by Captain Jace Malcolm, had been positioned on training duty as a sort of punishment for previous insubordination. They were entirely unprepared though for the Sith Empire's invasion, and they had very few defenses besides the injured or the green troops. And so the Republic's finest resorted to waging a fierce guerrilla war to hold the planet against the Sith Empire. Their victory was eventually achieved when Jace Malcolm led an ambush against Darth Malgus directly. And at that moment, a heroic arrival of the Republic fleet and the Jedi Satil Shan managed to throw the Sith off of Alderaan, leaving many heavy scars of Malgus himself and on the Sith Empire. It was a great moment of triumph for the Republic and for the Jedi. Riding their victory, the Republic gathered on the world of Hoth and prepared for a daring attack on the Imperial capital world of Dromund Kaas. But the Sith would not go out easily, and they launched another attack of their own. Both Republic and Sith fleets unleashed their prototype weapons, ripping apart ships on both sides of the war. Despite extremely heavy losses, the Empire prevented the Republic's primary assault, postponing the ending of the war once again. But this move proved to the Sith that the Republic had gained their footing, and they were not going down without a fight for their lives. And with fear no longer on their side, the Sith would need to gather help in the form of old allies. Very old allies. The Mandalorians. In 3664 BBY, the Sith sought to revive the Mandalorian clans from their generation of disunity. But without the knowledge of where the Mask of Mandalore was hidden, they had to choose a puppet leader through different means. On Geonosis, they would hold a combat arena of Mandalorians, and would spread rumors amongst the scattered clans that the man who was winning could become the new Mandalore. In reality though, he was simply a Sith plant. The plan though was successful, and the man they chose became known as Mandalore the Lesser. He was not as strong as the previous or the future Mandalores, but he was a loyal servant to the Sith, and a quick and an easy way to unite the clans. Under the leadership of Mandalore the Lesser, the Mandalorians blockaded the Hydean Way, severing a major Republic supply artery. Without fresh food and supplies, riots began to spark on Coruscant, as Republic forces were simply unable to break through the blockade, and the Senate began discussing the possibility of surrender. But an unlikely ally produced himself in the form of a smuggler by the name of Hylo Viz, who deployed a bold plan to break through the Sith blockade. After loading several freighters with supplies, Hylo led an alliance of smugglers in a surprise attack on the Mandalorians, which eventually rooted them out with the help of the Republic fleet. In the midst of the attack, or perhaps shortly after, the weak Mandalore the Lesser would be murdered and replaced, as Hylo Viz landed on Coruscant as a hero, and would sell her emergency supplies to the Republic for a massive fortune. The war raged onward without slowing down, and the light and the darkness continued to trade blows back and forth for several more years. The battle at Ord Radama saw another Republic victory, as they managed to break off a siege led by Darth Venamal, as well as Darth Malgus, though Malgus would attribute their failure to the political games being played by the Dark Council, which he believed hindered the flow of supplies to his men. The Jedi and the Republic pushed further into Sith space though, feinting yet another attack on Korriban. However, they had a different target. They immediately turned around and laid siege to the capital of the ancient Sith Empire, Ziost. They had hoped to establish a foothold on Ziost and in Sith space to gain a staging ground for which to strike at Dromund Kaas directly again. Yet after several months of fighting, this plan too failed, and the Republic were forced out of Sith space again. Malgus was furious that the Republic had gotten so far into their territory, and so he attacked. After assurance from the Dark Council that he would never face supply issues again, he launched an attack campaign which would end up bringing the First Galactic War to its close. It began in 3660 with the attack on Sereno. Malgus had learned that the legendary Master Ven Zalo was stationed there and poised for a massive attack. Wanting to send a message to the Jedi's most powerful, Malgus assailed Sereno and sent an assassin to kill Ven Zalo. However, the Jedi Master defeated the attacker and retreated off of the world to save the lives of his men. Sereno fell with minimal resistance to Malgus, but the Dark Lord greatly desired to face Zalo in combat. The Jedi was the real prize. Malgus was ordered to recapture the world of Ord Radama. This battle dragged on for months and proved far bloodier than the first. As the Republic traps continued to confound the Sith war effort, Malgus would enjoy victory once more as he employed heavy use of Force sensitive on the front lines of his army. The Sith rose to a leader of Malgus' stature. The final clash of the First Galactic War was the Battle of Ren Var, wherein the Sith scientist known as Darth Mechus invaded and established a stronghold, hoping that he could establish a lab and develop Sith bioweapons. This fortress was assailed by Satele Shan, who rallied the Jedi to stop the schemes of the mad Sith scientist, and eventually liberated the world. Finally, with the Empire's advancement towards the core halted, the war officially reached a total stalemate. This was when the Sith stunned the Republic by opening negotiations for a ceasefire. The Council, though, believed that this was a trap, and they recommended that the Senate decline the invitation, but the Senate ignored them. Senators and Jedi alike did agree that the war could not be won on the front lines of battle, and if nothing else, peace negotiations would offer a wary galaxy a bit of a period of reprieve. At the Senate's request, Grandmaster Zim agreed to send a contingent of Jedi with peace delegation. Soon, diplomats from both sides traveled to the world of Alderaan for negotiation. However, the Jedi Council's instincts were proven correct, for the Empire's sue for peace was indeed deception. As the diplomats converged and spoke on Alderaan, a large Sith fleet led by Malgus invaded and sacked the capital of Coruscant. The Dark Lord got the glory of leading his brethren right into the foyer of the Jedi Temple, slaughtering them all while his fleet bombarded the planet. Once Coruscant's planetary defenses were destroyed, the Sith destroyed the Jedi Temple outright. They even murdered the Supreme Chancellor, Barrakan, and blockaded the planet to hold its inhabitants permanently hostage. Meanwhile, on Alderaan, the Sith revealed their deception and used Coruscant as a bargaining chip to leverage a heavily unbalanced agreement in their favor. Facing no alternative though, the Republic was forced to sign the Treaty of Coruscant. This mandated that all Jedi and Republic forces stand down from combat duties and withdraw deep into Republic space, away from the Sith. It also demanded that the Republic reorganize the Empire as the legitimate ruler of the half of the galaxy that they had claimed, and that the Republic cede to the Empire a number of worlds that had not been conquered yet. Marking an extremely dark time, the Sith Empire was now absolutely gargantuan, and rivaled what was left of the Republic in sheer size alone. Although the Republic still stood, the Sith Empire had claimed a decisive victory in this war, and thus leads us to part 2, the Cold War. The feelings of hopelessness and defeat were palpable. To say that the Republic and the Jedi were merely discouraged would be like saying the only discomfort Vader ever experienced in his suit was being a little itchy. When something made of glass is broken, one might be able to pick up the pieces and glue them back together. But when those glass shards are each crushed back into the sand from whence they came, is one supposed to pick up each individual grain? This was the state of morale for those in the light side of this time. Caught off guard by the sudden onslaught of the Sith, the Republic had scrambled to defend itself. Panicked senators argued and fought for the defense of their sectors, but with the Republic's military and navy stretched thin, some worlds could not be safeguarded. Chaos erupted in the Senate chambers as representatives turned on one another. Debates grew hostile as politicians applied pressure and called in favors to buy protection for their homes and their family. Accusations of bribery and political strong-arming tarnished countless reputations, and by turning on itself in a galactic crisis, the Republic's Senate failed its people when they needed them the most. The Senate would forever be shaken by the misstep during the Great War, for their shock and desperation were soon replaced by regret, duty, and hope. They soon rallied once more to lead the Republic under the guidance of a new leader, Chancellor Jinaris. After Barrakan was murdered, Jinaris had jumped into a leadership role and directed relief efforts while preventing the capital from devolving into total chaos. The Republic politicians and citizens rallied under his authority and quickly elected him to be the next Supreme Chancellor, clinging to what little hope they had left. And there was someone else who believed that the Senate had much more to pay for. A rogue Jedi by the name of Dar Nala. He would eventually bomb the Senate building in order to assassinate the senators who had supported the Treaty of Coruscant originally. Her master plan was to orchestrate a fake Sith attack on an important Republic transport. However, when Dar Nala attempted to put the last phase of her plan into action, her madness was revealed to her supporters, and they utterly abandoned her to her death. But her sentiment was echoed by many forces of the Republic. Soldiers who had laid down their lives for their homes in the Republic did not accept the Treaty of Coruscant. Many troops, namely those on Dantooine and Balmorra, refused to withdraw and mutinied against the Republic military so that they could continue fighting the war against the Sith. As the treaty officially went into effect, worlds once allied with the Republic were left defenseless and were quickly absorbed by the Sith. Other planets, angered by the Senate's acceptance of their treaty, decided to separate themselves from the Republic entirely. The blame for the war's loss was unfairly placed at the feet of the Jedi though, and when the Jedi returned to Coruscant, they were not met with fanfare or comfort, but with scorn and anger for the people that they had died defending. The Senate refused to allocate any funding towards the rebuilding of their temple, leaving the Jedi Order effectively homeless. Now that political opinion had turned on the Jedi as well, the Jedi were left to wander the galaxy for years, having to just swallow the fact that thousands of them were now dead, and they had nothing to show for it. This was until Satele Shan ended up finding a new hyperlane in the deep core, one that led to the rediscovery of an important planet, the Jedi's ancestral homeworld of Tython. Finding peace and sanctuary with their roots, the Jedi moved their home back to Tython and rebuilt their order around the concept of hope and light. Eventually, Satele Shan would become elected as the Grand Master, and she modeled the new temple after the architectural philosophy of Alderaan's castles to evoke humility, serenity, and patience. This period of ceasefire lasted for 11 strenuous years. The Cold War was very tense, in which both sides kept a sharp eye on one another. Small proxy wars would erupt along the border between the Republic and the Sith Empire, but since they were being fought by third parties, both the Republic and the Sith had plausible deniability, even though they were secretly supplying and sponsoring opposite sides of the proxy wars. Border skirmishes included battles on Balmorra, Ord Mantell, Terrace, and especially on Alderaan, which saw its own civil war erupt as a result of the various noble families making mad grabs for power, each one being supported by either a Republic representative or a Sith Lord. Besides these smaller skirmishes, various clandestine operations were carried out by each side. The uneasy truce between the two galactic powers at the time constantly teetered on the verge of collapse, and everyone knew that the second war was inevitable. But the how and the when it would happen was completely in the air. This time is seen as one of the most significant periods in the history of the galaxy though, particularly for the Sith. They held immense strength at this point, and this is well regarded as having been the time in when the Sith were at their mightiest. And this is not an erroneous claim either. The Sith Empire was officially a galactic superpower. The Republic no longer had a monopoly on being the only centralized government in the galaxy. But despite the Sith Empire being stronger than ever, Vitiate seemed uninterested in continuing his conquest. He would fully become a recluse into obscurity once more, handing the ruler of the Empire back to the Dark Council. And then he began to pursue his own mysterious goals, allowing the Sith to consolidate power while he enacted a new plan. As the years wore on, many in the Republic called for action, while others braced for an incoming storm. The goodwill that the Chancellor had garnered in the beginning was quickly eroding as the Sith tested the Republic's temper time and time again, and the Chancellor refused to ignite yet another war, ignoring all the protests from the Senate floor and displeasure in his closest advisors. But whether the Chancellor liked it or not, war loomed on the horizon of the Republic like an all-seeing eye. And soon enough, many Republic leaders wondered if Jinaris was strong enough to lead them in another war against the Sith. They all knew that once it sparked again, it was do or die, and if they hesitated as they had in the beginning, it would mean the erasure of the Republic. At the time of their greatest need, several heroes would begin to emerge towards the end of the Cold War. On Tython, two very powerful talented Jedi, a Knight and a Consular, would arrive, and they became notable participants in the war. They contributed greatly to the effort, and each earned their own title. The Knight became known as the Hero of Tython, and the Jedi Consular became known as the Bar Senthor, which was a special prestigious rank in the Jedi, which meant Warden of the Order. The Hero of Tython had been able to completely thwart a bold attack on behalf of the Sith. Darth Angral took the Desolator, which was a Sith superweapon, directly to Tython, with the intention of destroying the planet, but it was defeated by the Hero of Tython. Elsewhere though, the Warden of the Jedi had saved what may have been the only hope of survival for the Republic. In the wake of the Great War, a group of influential planets became disillusioned by Republican competence and united to form what is known as the Rift Alliance. By joining forces and threatening to break ties with the Republic completely, the valuable and resource-rich worlds of Salakumi, A-10-2, Balmorra, Mannan, Aragorn, and Sarkai commanded the Republic's attention. Losing one would be devastating, but losing the entire Rift Alliance would prove catastrophic. The Jedi Watchmen, though, offered a calming hand and stopped them from seceding from the Republic. This also involved thwarting yet another plot to destroy the Republic by the Sith that would make the Rift Alliance separate from the Republic entirely. While this was all happening, a smuggler had managed to use his connections to the Imperial Underground Network to expose Imperial agents within the Senate. Simultaneously, he worked as a privateer for the Republic to defeat a dangerous Imperial admiral, and in doing so, he earned himself a title of the Void Hound. He also amassed a massive pirate fleet and a criminal empire with which to quietly support the Republic from the shadows. And perhaps it should go without saying out of universe, but these are the player characters that you can control in Star Wars The Old Republic MMO. But for the sake of this holocron, we are going to assume that each character chose all of the light side options. These are considered the canon outcomes in their respective stories. But of course, parallel to these events, the Sith Empire was birthing their own champions in the darkness. The Force itself now began to swell. Powerhouses were set up on a collision course with one another across the stars, Jedi and Sith. But soon, the proxy wars, which both the Republic and the Sith Empire had been trying to keep swept under the rug, could no longer be ignored. The Jedi Warden helped end the massive ongoing war on Balmorra, officially throwing the Sith off of the industrial planet which had been plagued for 3 decades of non-stop warfare. Meanwhile, Darth Nox and the Sith managed to completely sabotage the efforts on Terra's rebuilding project, which had been going well since its destruction by Malak 300 years earlier. The fractures in the peace were beginning to show, and soon, the fractures would snap. The Force ghost of Mitra Surik would appear to the Jedi Master Oteg, one of Yoda's species. She revealed to him that Revan was indeed alive, and currently captured by the Sith Emperor and being held in stasis. With the conflict now heating back up, Revan needed to be rescued. Oteg believed that Revan perhaps had vital information on how to defeat not only the Empire, but also Vitiate. So the Jedi fleet, and a task force of Force sensitives and Jedi, were sent to save Revan. Their venture was eventually successful, and Revan himself returned to the battle. Revan was then made fully aware of the crisis facing the galaxy, and he set out to utterly destroy the Sith with the age of the ancient Rakatan technology. Dark against dark. Inspired by the Starforge, he targeted an automated mass manufacturing space station known as the Foundry. The Foundry was set up to manufacture countless extermination droids designed with bioscanners to detect Sith genetic material and destroy all those that contained Sith, which would result in the genocide of their entire order. However, the Empire had prepared for this exact situation, and Darth Malgus, long opposed to the peace with the Republic, revealed that it was him that had allowed the Republic to successfully save Revan by his own design and plot. Malgus intended that Revan would lead the Empire to the Foundry, and then Malgus would claim it and use it in his war against the Republic. The Imperial strike team was successful in their attack on the Foundry, destroying the few active extermination droids, and they even turned against Revan. But something mysterious happened here. Revan vanished in a mysterious burst of light and energy, and despite this odd occurrence, the Empire mopped up the remaining Republic starships and claimed total victory, and with it, ownership of the Foundry. Elsewhere, the Jedi Master Tol Braga had set in motion an ambitious plan, a plan to either capture or to assassinate the Sith Emperor to avert the coming war. He established a team of his own of the strongest Jedi warriors that he could find, which included even the hero of Tython, and went about attempting to locate Vitiate. They would end up finding the Dark Lord, but their attack quickly turned sour. The power of the Emperor was beyond any of them, and he stood there in his dark glory. They were all easily defeated by his command of the dark side, and with this failed strike at the Emperor himself, the war would begin yet again in the year 3642 BBY. And we reach Part 3, the Second Galactic War. The career of Supreme Chancellor Jorian Generis came to a sudden end at the outbreak of the war. This had been a result of his approval rating plummeting, and the political machinations of the Twi'lek senator, Leontine Saresh. This woman was an incredibly fiery and a charismatic politician that had escaped imperial slavery, but now she found herself applauded at the gullible and naive leadership of the Republic. She had made an ambitious career with the singular goal of destroying the Sith Empire at any cost, and once she gained enough political power, she would be voted in as the next Supreme Chancellor in a landslide election. On this day, she made a promise to the people of the Republic. She would lead them to a final victory against the Empire, whatever the cost. Sadly, the promise would have to wait, as the Republic had started the next phase on the back foot of the war. The war began with the cunning Plan Zero enacted by the Dark Council member Darth Baras. This was a plot with the twofold objective of assassinating the War Trust, the War Trust being a group of 4 important beings which formed the Republic military leadership at the time, and in doing that, ignite a war in which the Republic would no longer have the leadership necessary to win. Acting through his apprentice, Darth Baras used this plan with a smashing success. The leaders were murdered, war was reignited, and the Republic was already starting to lose its hand. The Empire opened with a devastating offensive by invading dozens of worlds at a time, ambushing Republic fleets en masse, but the Jedi came back stronger than before, and they were able to protect the core worlds while also rooting out the corruption within the Senate, corruption within the very ranks of the Jedi, spies. The Sith Emperor's long-term project, the Children of the Emperor, had seen his agents unwittingly placed into the Republic's society, each rising to levels of significant power and influence, and among them was Sio Bakarn, a member of the Jedi High Council. While most were unaware of his true nature, they remained puppets to the Emperor's will, his children bound to obey his wishes. These children of the Emperor became the primary threat of the Warden of the Order, who would seek to root them all out, remove the threat from its core. It was then revealed that one of these unwilling slaves was even the hero of Tython, who had been captured and corrupted by the Emperor following his failed assassination attempt. But the spirit of the hero's old Jedi Master helped to break the influence of the Emperor's will with the help of a Sith Lord, Lord Scourge, the Sith who had once helped and betrayed Revan and Mitra. But since his betrayal, Scourge had learned the truth of what Emperor Vitiate really was, and Scourge had been playing the long game since that day 300 years ago. While no friend to the Jedi or the Republic, Scourge was well aware that the Emperor had designs which went beyond political or philosophical differences. Vitiate planned to use a ritual to enhance his power and lifespan by destroying not only some, but all life in the galaxy. Armed with this knowledge, the hero of Tython, Darth Scourge, and their allies set out to stop him. This required them stopping attacks on the prison world of Belsavis and the core world of Corellia. Unfortunately though, in the hero's mad scramble to parry the Emperor's attempt at widespread genocide, an old threat would emerge again. The Dreadmasters broke free of the confines of their prison, and the Republic and the Jedi pressed their victories and made a final daring strike. The Jedi would target Droman Kos finally. The hero of Tython battled his way to the Dark Temple, where he would put an end to the horrific ritual being conducted by Vitiate. At this point, Vitiate was simply using another host body and would be defeated after a grueling battle. This defeat, though, left his consciousness temporarily weakened and requiring respite, so it fled and joined with his main body in an unknown location to recover. The Emperor was not immortal, but this effectively left the Empire without a ruler now. One may think with the temporary defeat of the Sith Emperor that things would calm down, but it's actually the opposite. The Empire surged forward by unrolling a new wave of superweapons, weapons designed by Darth Mekis, one of which was known as the Ascendant Spear, a massive dreadnought powered by the dark side, and another weapon, the Silencer, which was a capital ship armed with a fleet-destroying super laser. But now that Vitiate had been put down for a while, other factions began to rise to claim power that he left in the vacuum. In a strange turn of events, the Second Galactic War would be much less about the Republic and the Sith Empires fighting, but instead, them smashing against one another while dealing with an onslaught of a third-party enemy rising from the woodwork. The first of these would be Darth Malgus, who would rise as a threat to the Sith Empire. Long frustrated with the Empire and the Dark Council for the events of the Treaty of Coruscant, Malgus started his own empire, becoming an issue for both Sith and Republic alike, being deemed the False Emperor Malgus. But Malgus was not the only one. The Dreadmasters would lead the Empire and the Republic through their own fresh round of hostilities. Long subservient to the Emperor, this group found no one worthy of their loyalty after his defeat, and so their power fell to themselves. They each wanted to rule the galaxy separately. They would use the ancient technology of the Great Hypergates to summon an eldritch horror of the dark side. Being some of the only beings in the galaxy that knew of it, they reached out to an entity known as the Terror from Beyond and unleashed it upon the galaxy. What's interesting though, is we don't have a lot of information about this entity. The only thing we really know is that the Jedi defeated it relatively quickly. And if all of this wasn't enough, the Hutts at this time had decided to throw their own hats in the ring. They arrived seemingly from nowhere with wild imaginations of the galaxy ruled by not the Sith or the Republic, but by the Hutt clan. In response to the attacks and the lost territories, the Hutt cartel seized control of 10 neutral star systems, which in turn drew the attention of both the Sith and the Republic. Alarmed by the unexpected threat, both powers sent strike forces to confront the Hutt. Eventually, the threats of the Hutt and the Dreadmasters were cast down by the Republic and the Empire though, as Darth Malgus' dream of usurping control of the Sith had come to nothing. But this all only set the stage for the return of an enemy that the galaxy had hoped that they had seen the last of, a Sith Lord by the name of Darth Revan. After his defeat at the Foundry, Revan's unstable soul had torn itself in twain, the light half passing into the Force, and the dark half which was left behind. Darth Revan had officially returned now, and he gathered a cult unto himself known as the Revanites, also known as the Order of Revan. He also somehow amassed a massive force while everyone was distracted fighting one another. Using his brilliant strategic mind for evil, Revan orchestrated a war between the Revanites, the Sith, and the Republic to get both of the major players out of the game quickly. His ultimate plan, though, was to clear their runway so that he could forcefully bring Vitiate's spirit out from his healing hibernation. Vitiate had always been the real target. Trillions could die, and Revan didn't care as long as Vitiate was numbered among them. Darth Revan believed that he was the only one who could bring a true end to Darth Vitiate, and resurrecting him was the only way to interrupt him from gaining full strength. And the only way to do that was to bind the spirit of the Emperor to a corporeal form, and then slay that form to end the threat forever. But of course, Revan's plan would risk bringing back the greatest master of evil that the galaxy had ever seen to full power. In another shocking turn, Grand Master Jedi Shatil Shan would meet with the Dark Council member Darth Mar, and the two would come to an agreement. They would have a peace summit where they discovered Revan's master plan and goal. Their two armies then decided to combine forces in a historic alliance between Jedi and Sith. And together as one force, they stormed Yavin 4 and attempted to stop Revan's resurrection ritual of Vitiate. While they were successful in defeating Revan though, they had not stopped Vitiate's spirit from returning. As the light half of Revan joined back with the darker half, the man was able to fully pass on in the Force, leaving some good news for our hero turned villain. But that left the galaxy with the spirit of the resurrected Vitiate, who didn't stick around long enough to chat, and fled deep into the unknown. 1 year later, in the year 3636 BBY, the Emperor made his presence known once more. Appearing on the ancient world of Ziost, he had taken over the population, dominated their minds, and forced them to slaughter one another, murdering his own. Using the bloodbath as fuel, he fed upon the dark side growing there, growing strong enough in turn to conduct a ritual of his own. The Republic and the Empire once again raced towards Ziost, hoping to destroy the nefarious now entity, which led to the famous invasion of Ziost. However, they were too late, and Vitiate managed to conduct the same ritual that he had done on Nathema. The Emperor drained all of the life energy out of the planet, leaving it a gray dead husk, and returning his spirit to full form. With this accomplished, he once again would flee, this time to the uncharted areas of wild space, away from Jedi and Sith alike. Vitiate was to become something more than a Sith, something worse. Unbeknownst to his enemies, the Emperor had secretly been building an entirely separate empire, one divorced from the Sith that he had once ruled. There, his spirit and consciousness rested into a single individual, consolidating all of his godlike abilities into the vessel of a man named Valkorion. From the mysterious world of Zakul, Valkorion presided over the newest galactic superpower that utterly dwarfed anything the Republic or the Empire had faced thus far, including each other. With blades of sunset gold, the Eternal Empire now marched upon the galaxy, and no one would be prepared for what would happen next. Part 4: Rise of the Eternal Empire. The Eternal Empire was a power born from a very superstitious people, but they also had some of the strongest ancient technology ever developed in lore. It was the Eternal Fleet that made them so formidable. This was an armada of ships that were faster, stronger, and more durable than anything the galaxy had to offer during this era. They could come together in a unified formation to unleash a superweapon level attack. Each ship was operated remotely by a sentient droid hive mind known as the Gemini, which was linked directly to the Eternal Throne. Any who sat upon the throne and had command over the fleet effectively had command over the Eternal Empire itself. Using this new power at his fingertips, Valkorion planned to usurp control over the galaxy and complete his mission of draining all life from it to become the ultimate being in the universe. And his first plan to do this was to execute a series of raids on the Republic and the Sith Empire to test their fortitude. In 3636 BBY, Valkorion dispatched the Eternal Fleet along with his finest soldiers, the Knights of Zakuul, led by his two twin sons, Arcan and Thexan. The Eternal Raids were a lightning series of offensives carried out by the Eternal Empire, striking indiscriminately at Sith and Republic targets alike across the stars. The Empire's few outposts in wild space had been completely wiped out by the Eternal Empire, and while the Sith Empire was unable to identify who was attacking them, the worlds of Alderaan, Denon, Darvanis, Mimbam, and even Korriban fell under the might of the Eternal Empire for a period. And then, just as quickly as they came, they vanished. Darth Mar, who was now the de facto head of the Council, led yet another Sith Republic alliance into wild space to pursue the Emperor in the Eternal Throne, only to be ambushed by the Eternal Fleet. Darth Mar and another figure, who would become known as the Outlander, were captured by Prince Arcan, the son of Valkorion, and brought to the Emperor on Zakuul. Here Valkorion offered to share his power with his captives, if they would only kneel. Darth Mar, though, recognized Valkorion's true nature, calling him vitiate, and refused. In response, Valkorion murdered him there for his defiance. However, as Valkorion turned to extend the same offer to the Outlander, he would be betrayed and murdered by his son Arcan, who had grown bitter towards his father, especially after the loss of his twin brother Thexan. The new Emperor Arcan, though, publicly placed the blame of Valkorion's assassination on the Outlander, and declared that the core worlds would burn as a result. He then had the Outlander frozen in carbonite, as Arcan sensed that Valkorion would continue to live on within the Outlander's very mind, his father not killed so easily. Now in control of the extremely nimble Eternal Fleet, though, the war Arcan waged was the galaxy-shifting event that was so destructive that it outdid anything seen before. Arcan boldly attacked both Republic and Sith fleets at once, blasting their shipyards to bits and blockading all major trade routes as well. Within a scant 3 months, the smaller Eternal Empire had naval superiority over both the Sith and the Republic, and by the end of 3636, both the Republic capital of Coruscant and the Imperial capital of Dromund Kaas were blockaded by the Eternal Empire. The Dark Council attempted to fight to their very last breath, but without the strong power and will of Darth Mar, they were completely obliterated. On the other side of things, though, the Jedi Order had been so utterly crushed by the Eternal Empire that they too were scattered, and Grandmaster Satele Shan went into exile. For the very first time since the Dark Wars, the Republic was left without their Jedi defenders. Despite this, though, the fiery Supreme Chancellor Saresh refused to submit to Zakuul in the Eternal Fleet. She stubbornly waged a war on both the Eternal Empire and the Sith at the same time, costing millions of Republic lives. It seems her passion was now working against her, and she would be impeached by the Senate. Afterwards, both the Republic and the Sith sued for peace with the Eternal Empire, unable to defeat this new threat. Arcan would shockingly agree, provided that both factions pay exorbitantly heavy tributes to Zakuul and submit themselves to armament restrictions. With little options left to them, both the Sith and the Republic agreed. In the years that would follow, Saresh was out of office, but continued to dictate policy through her successor, Chancellor Jebavel Madon. Similarly, the Dark Council practically dissolved its remaining members, except for Darth Asina, who declared herself Empress of the Sith. Even after this, the war between the Republic and the Empire would continue. Saresh, who was still pulling strings in the background of the Republic, was unwilling to even consider any form of alliance with the Sith to overthrow the Eternal Throne. Emperor Arcan allowed this to continue, provided that they kneel before the supremacy of the Eternal Empire, and continued to pay tribute. And after 5 more years, the Eternal Empire reigned as the dominant superpower in the galaxy. But hope would eventually shine through. A legendary ship from the past was discovered, the Gravestone. This was a massive dreadnought built around the time that the Eternal Fleet was also constructed. It was powerful and possessed a weapon known as the Omni Cannon, making it the only ship in existence with the power to rival the Eternal Fleet. In fact, legend has it that the Gravestone was specifically made to counter the fleet. The former intelligence minister of the Sith Empire managed to sneak into the prison facility of Zakuul, and there, the Sith freed the Outlander from the containment of the Carbonite. The Outlander and the Liberators then escaped Zakuul on the Gravestone, while managing to destroy a few Eternal warships in the process. This showed the galaxy that Zakuul was not invincible. This act sparked courage in many within the core worlds, and on the worlds of Odessen, the Eternal Alliance was formed. This was a rebellion specifically aimed at taking down the Eternal Empire, and the idea had been started by none other than Valkorion's own wife, a former Imperial Knight, Senya Tyrell. The Outlander then became known as the Commander, as they led the charge of the Alliance. The Alliance would contain contacts from both the Republic and the Sith, and utilize both to make several bold strikes against the Eternal Throne. Such strikes were carried out on Alderaan, Belsavis, Hoth, Narth Shaddaa, Tatooine, and on Voss. These actions attracted multiple allies from the Republic, Sith, Mandalorians, and even from the criminal underworld, all of whom brought them starships, weapons, and ammunition. All of this came together to allow the Alliance to actually rival the Eternal Empire. The galaxy rallied around them. However, during this time, the Republic would actually keep away from the conflict. Their hope had been utterly crushed, and without the brave leadership of the Jedi, the Republic had become spineless. They were content with simply paying Zakuul their tribute as to save the lives of their citizens. This was, of course, though, aided by the secret string pulling of Saresh, as the Sith would still prove themselves to be not so passive and dangerous, as their new Empress Asina would join the revolt after seeing that the Alliance had a real chance of victory against the Eternal Throne, and things were about to get even better. The Alliance would discover an 150-year-old droid that called itself Scorpio. It was the same design of the Gemini captains of the Eternal Fleet, in fact. But Scorpio's sentience and independence allowed her to be much more intelligent than they were, and more powerful. She hastened plans with the Alliance which would allow her to remotely take control of the Gemini captain systems, thereby taking the AI of the Eternal Fleet out of the equation entirely. However, Scorpio followed her own agenda, and used the opportunity to take over the throne for herself. In the Battle of Odessen, the commander injured and defeated Arkan, who was then taken by his mother Senya into hiding in order to recuperate and heal. Thus, rulership passed to Arkan's sister Vaylin, who allied with Scorpio and proclaimed herself the Empress of the Eternal Empire. And the cruelty of the reign of Empress Vaylin quickly exceeded even that of his brothers, as Vaylin would set her sights on her mother with a bloodthirsty appetite for vengeance. But despite Vaylin's incredible power, her ravenous personality left her prone to mistakes. This led to the discovery of Vaylin's mental conditioning placed upon her by none other than Valkorion, who even feared her. And with the keys to her mind, the Alliance commander attempted to subdue her during a festival to be held in her honor. But even though that failed, the Alliance would gain an unexpected ally, the healed Prince Arkan. During a visit to the Thema, Vaylin broke all of her mental conditioning and chains, while at the same time, the Alliance had a different target, Dramath's holocron, a holocron they believed held the knowledge on how to destroy the Emperor's very soul once and for all. And in following the assault on the Odessen, Vaylin would eventually be defeated and killed. Shocked at the death of their Empress, this would lead to the mass surrender of the Zakuulian military forces. However, with the throne now empty, the Gemini captains of the fleet went rogue, the AI taking over, and began bombarding inhabited worlds, seeking to annihilate all complex life in the galaxy. The AI of the fleet attempted to attack all major worlds including Coruscant, Dromund Kaas, and worst of all, they even targeted Zakuul. The Alliance engaged the Eternal Fleet in the Battle of Zakuul, where the commander destroyed the spirit of Vitiate and would claim the Eternal Throne. Now with the fleet back under control, the Empire was absorbed into the Eternal Alliance, and the threat of Zakuul was officially ended. In the following next 2 years, the other governments were busy with recovery from the Eternal Fleet bombardment, but if only peace could have lasted a while longer. Although they had once had a mutual enemy to overcome, the Republic and Sith Empire were never allies. Their members were once a part of the Alliance that went their separate ways, and everyone began preparations for a third galactic war. None of them were looking forward to it, but this is just how things were. By this point, the puppet figure Jebavel Madon had resigned from office, leaving the leadership of the Senate in the hands of someone far more capable. In the year 3627, an operation labeled the Task Force Nova was brought about. This was a joint military-civilian initiative founded by the newest Chancellor, Galina Ranz. This was done to rebuild the fragmented Jedi, and to readopt them back into the Republic. All of these events are the tales of the Old Republic. As it stands with this documentary's writing, stories are still being told in this era, and there is a lot out of place that we still don't know about. So we're trying not to leave stuff off, but we don't have the complete picture. It is unknown what became of the Eternal Alliance, or the Sith Empire, or even how the war ended, but we do know that eventually the conflict ceased with yet another shaky Republic victory, and the Sith Empire being left fractured. The Jedi were able to rebuild themselves once more, and became the stronger order of the two. Though over 100 years later, the Order would have to face the threat of a new Dark Lord, Darth Sidious. Darth Sidious, who raised a terrifying army after the year 3522 BBY. Unfortunately, the Republic is not as prevalent within this conflict, and it was much more of an internal Jedi affair, since Darth Sidious himself was a fallen Jedi. So the Jedi handled this war. But in the year 3017, the 17th and the final Alsakan conflict would come to a close. Coruscant and Alsakan duked it out one last time in an arms race for increasingly more impressive ships. But the one who ends the war in its totality would be Corellia, who had long since stood as neutral in the middle of it all. Prince Jonasha E. Solo would settle this tiring struggle once and for all on the Senate floor, forcing Coruscant and Alsakan to sign a permanent treaty of peace, and he did so with literal swords pointed at their back. This was truly the end of an era of war. But as the curtains of the time known as the Great Galactic War finally close, we can turn to the words of Master Yoda regarding the state of the Republic in this time. Twilight is upon me, and soon night must fall. Chapter 7, Twilight of the Republic. The Republic endures, but not without its scars. The thinning echoes of war still linger, haunting the halls of the Senate and the meditations of the Jedi. Worlds rebuild, treaties are signed, and for the first time in generations, silence falls over a wounded galaxy. But it is not a silence of peace, it is the eye of the storm. The Sith, though shattered, are not destroyed. Their latest empire may have failed, but their ambition is eternal, mightier than ever. But on the opposite end, the weight of age now presses down upon the Republic, a Republic too tired to see what will come next. This is the last great breath before the plunge. The fall has come, and not without triumph or tragedy, but rather, the fall of the Republic will be a slow unraveling of the next age. We are approaching the end. Part 1, New Sith Wars. 2000 BBY would mark the beginning of the Draguluk period, which would last for a full 1,000-year time block. During this era, the Sith Order would clash against the Jedi in a series of repeated wars that would end up costing them everything. Although the very foundations of the Republic were cracked and beginning to break, it would come to be the final gasp of the Sith Order. But they weren't going out without a bang. Since the ending of the reconstituted Sith Empire, the Order of Dark Lords seemed to have vanished for a time. Not a single one had been seen since Darth Sidious. This was over 1,500 years earlier, and during that time, the Republic had enjoyed a welcome time of peace and quiet. The Jedi had grown somewhat complacent, but were understandably just hoping that their generation of relative peace would continue on. The Order had since built itself back up after its previous dramatic losses, but little did they know that Darth Sidious was only the beginning of yet another wave of their own members falling to the dark side in droves. The fourth and the final Great Schism would occur in this millennia, when a Jedi master by the name of Phanius ideologically objected to the Jedi doctrine and would seek out the way of the Sith. While his parting from the Jedi Order was initially peaceful, Master Phanius became one of the Lost 20 during his departure. He eventually, though, returned with a new philosophy and a new name, calling himself Darth Ruin. Instigating the next schism, he gathered over 50 Jedi that would join him. He then filled out the rest of his ranks by first infiltrating and then uniting the surviving Sith clans under his own leadership. Merciless and supremely self-centered, Ruin's egocentric whims led to the deaths of many of his followers, and eventually, Ruin's single-mindedness proved to be his own undoing. After a large defeat, Ruin's minions rose up and killed him, but despite his death, the rebirth of the Sith was now complete. Once again, the Sith pulled themselves together into a new empire, and took back worlds such as Yavin 4 and Ziost with their initial invasion. The Jedi took much faster action this time though, hoping to destroy the Sith before they plunged the entire galaxy into more chaos and war. Once again, they were on the forefront of the Republic's war effort, but it would be during this time that the Jedi were harshly reminded why they were peacekeepers first, and not soldiers. When they decided to be militant, it led to tragedy. The worst of these tragedies occurred in 1800 BBY exactly. The Ubis, who were illegally constructing superweapons on their world of Uba 4, forcing the Jedi to intervene, which led to a battle. With no other choice, they ordered an orbital bombardment of the planet. This hasty move, however, ignited the rest of the banned superweapons, which engulfed the planet of Uba and the entire system in radioactive firestorms that the Jedi were responsible for. The native Ubis are nearly exterminated by this event, and it sparked a deep-seated hatred for the Republic among these people, as they accused the Republic for xenocide for centuries after this. The Jedi were unable to make reparations for this tragedy because the Sith had now had another Dark Lord ruling over them. Assembling a mighty fleet from the Kuat shipyards like in the old days, the Republic and the Jedi met their last challenge, this mysterious Dark Underlord, who was not a single man, but in fact was a dark spirit. A spirit that led a faction of Sith calling themselves the Black Knights. In 1750 BBY, he rose to power and led the new Sith Empire in a crusade against the Republic. The Black Knights directed them into a bloody marauding campaign against the Outer Rim territories, one that chiseled away the Republic's control bit by bit. The cult's main focus of terror was on worlds and space stations along the Zona Miki hyperspace route. The battles were eventually turned around though by a Jedi Master by the name of Murtok, who garnered the first alliance between the Jedi and Mandalorians. Together, they would attack the Dark Underlord and defeat him in the Battle of Malrev 4. But it was not just the Sith that was causing the democratic civilization problems, as many mineral mines began to run dry, and thousands of megacorporations would go bankrupt. The borders began to shrink for the first time since the Cold War, as colony worlds dried up and were eventually abandoned. Hardship brewed lawlessness, and the Jedi were forced to take a more active role in the government. In a move of desperation, many Jedi began serving as the Supreme Chancellor in succession. In time, the Jedi grew to such immense political power that they were practically controlling the entirety of the Republic. By 1500 BBY, they were finally able to push back quite aggressively against the new Sith though, desperately wanting to stamp it out like before. The Jedi had won many impressive victories in the expansion of the Outer Rim region, halting all Sith advances in their wake. But for nearly 40 years, the Republic felt as though they may have a definitive victory over the Sith. But it was not to be. Not for a long time at least. The Sith had managed to recruit the violent Devorian and the Hetan species to the Empire, and in 1466 BBY, they would score a victory that would turn the entire age on its head. The Battle of Mizra would go down in infamy as one of the worst Jedi defeats in all of galactic history. It was immortalized by the poet Felix, who describes scores of Sith speeders bearing scores of Sith Lords, each vehicle bearing the name of a predatory creature that embodied the character of its rider. The Sith Lords' lightsabers illuminated the ash-blackened sky like stars of blood, and their repulsor-lift chariots drowned out the screams of the dying. In this battle, a Jedi coordinator was employing battle meditation to boost the combat performance and prowess of the Republic soldiers, and to hinder that of the Sith. But somehow, despite all of this, the Sith still emerged victorious. The Jedi then mounted a full retreat, at which point a Sith sniper killed the Jedi coordinator. As a result, the retreat turned into a slaughter, with more than 500,000 Republic troops murdered, and hundreds of Jedi becoming captured, and subsequently converted to the dark side. In 1400 BBY, this would be the last time a non-Jedi served as Supreme Chancellor, as for the next 4 centuries, only Jedi would hold the office in an attempt to keep the decaying Republic together. During that period, they would endure more onslaughts from the Sith, those that included the rise and defeat of the Mad Darth Riven, and the Sictus Wars of 1250. This would entail the Dark Lady Belia Darzu unleashing what is known as the Technovirus. This plague consisted of microscopic nanites that entered the orifices of organic beings and made them rapidly grow cybernetic tumors that then consumed their body. Once complete, they then became what is known as a Techno-Beast, cyborg creatures mentally enslaved to Belia herself. She would raise an army of these techno-beasts, which consisted of all manner of creatures from around the stars, and would attack the Jedi openly, even managing to corrupt their homeworld of Tython, ruining it in the process. But interestingly, with every time a Sith Lord would rise to prominence, they were backstabbed by their own minions and underlings, usurped by other Sith. So although the Republic was actively dying, the Sith's own infighting kept them from being able to fully stamp them out. After 900 years of war, both sides were in a state of near collapse, bringing about the era known as the Republic Dark Age in 1100 BBY. Later historians would look on this time as when the Republic temporarily disbanded and became something like a feudal kingdom. At this point, the Republic's finances had taken such a hit that they could no longer afford to maintain their communications through the HoloNet. and they could only keep the core worlds open. So in a drastic move, the Republic deactivated hyperspace relays beyond the core, colonies, and a part of the Inner Rim, severing instantaneous communication with the Outer Rim and disrupting Sith conquests. Instead, they relied on hyperspace carrier ships, which only slowed down their ability to communicate and gave the Sith an opportunity to impede. However, this denied the Sith real-time hyperspace data, leaving them reliant on outdated coordinates. With the flow of communication halted, it would slow the progress of just about everything. And if all of this wasn't bad enough, a galaxy-wide pandemic broke out as the Kandorian Plague began to kill off as much as 2/3 of the population of most civilized worlds. The Sith grew exponentially during the Dark Age, even though they continued to squabble over leadership. Great libraries and storehouses of ancient wisdom had been seized or destroyed, and in regions under Sith control, technological advancement largely stagnated. With little commercial incentive for innovation, some Sith territories lacked any form of currency, relying entirely on slave labor or droids for manufacturing. Nevertheless, some corporations continued to operate under Sith rule successfully. But during this, Republic strongly encouraged all corporations within operations in Sith-controlled territory to withdraw behind their territory lines, both to protect their personnel and to prevent Republic technology from falling into enemy hands. As it can clearly be seen, it is very accurate to call this time a Dark Age. The galaxy had not only stagnated, but was even regressing in many areas. The very survival of civilized society now fell into the hands of the Jedi Knights. By now, the Jedi had almost fully taken over the bureaucracy of the Republic and had control over the military and the Navy. In this age, Master Gennara was Supreme Chancellor, and she had sanctioned for the Jedi to join together to defend individual worlds, and even regions of space from the Sith threat, but also against pirates, slavers, and warlords who were all taking advantage of the now crumbling galaxy. In some regions, the Jedi supported existing governments, while in others, they even became rulers themselves in order to protect the population from external threats. This gave rise to the title of Jedi Lord, which were members of the Jedi Order that had taken the position of an aristocrat or a ruler of a planet or system. They established castles and manors of their formal residencies. These lords created a formal hereditary system, passing down their titles to their offspring for several generations. This more hands-on approach was taken in the spirit of keeping the Republic as safe as possible from the Sith threat, which seemed to come from every side of the galaxy now. And as the domains of these Jedi Lords would be islands of light, and preservation in an ocean of bleak galactic darkness. However, these Jedi Lords held much more power than the Order would have liked them to. The Jedi High Council ended up competing directly with the Jedi Grand Council, which consisted of lords from across the galaxy. The Grand Council had gained enough standing to where they did not have to obey the High Council at all, which caused the two institutions to clash frequently on political matters. Finally, having formulated a bulwark against the Sith, the Republic was able to halt the war to a standstill. The Sith perceived the weakened government as a sign that the dark side was with them though, and they would finally win this war. However, they soon began to fight amongst one another yet again, after disputing on who would rule the galaxy after the Republic's defeat. Pathetic. This petty presumption led to a second Sith Civil War, which broke out in the year 1066 BBY and lasted for over 50 years. Their own fighting over who would defeat the Republic ended up costing them their assured victory, and the Sith Empire crumbled in a matter of decades without the Republic ever having to do much at all. With the Sith almost having ended their own threat, one man would rise up to rally them together for a final assault. Yet another fallen Jedi by the name of Lord Skier Khan. 1010 BBY marks the formation of the Brotherhood of Darkness, which would be the very last battle cry of the old Sith Order. Lord Khan would form the Brotherhood of Darkness in an effort to mitigate the issue plaguing the Sith, which would be their repeated, continuous infighting which was costing them their assured victory. Khan attempted to establish an order which saw the Sith Lords treat each other as equals, leaving behind the title of Darth in order to symbolize this new mindset. This was quite successful for a time at first, and saw many isolated Sith Lords come together to accomplish great things. Great terrible things. They took back Korriban, in fact, established a training academy exclusively for those with an aptitude to become Sith Lords. Then they conquered and used the worlds of Dathomir and Iridonia to produce Sith Marauders as cannon fodder. They then used the worlds of Ryloth, Umbara, Nar Shaddaa to train Sith spies and assassins. Khan's war began in earnest in the year 1004 BBY. The Brotherhood initially attacked Roman Kos and Malray IV, hoping to gain back worlds significant to their heritage. But the Republic, anticipating this, repulsed their invasions with brutal force. Kaan, though, regrouped and launched a second wave, this time rolling over Kashyyyk and chasing the Jedi Defenders to Trandosha. On Trandosha, the Brotherhood absolutely destroyed all Jedi hideouts and any natives who challenged them. After Trandosha, the Sith racked up a grim string of victories. Their elite trooper squad, known as the Gloomwalkers, subjugated Fasira and gained a fierce reputation as a result. It just so happens that the commander of the Gloomwalkers was a man by the name of Dessel, who we all know as Darth Bane. Kaan became more bold with his tactics and attacked the inner rim worlds of Ambria and Tanab. Tanab especially was a devastating loss, as it had a massive agricultural industry that fed dozens of worlds along the Perlemian trade route. During this period, a Jedi Lord who had gained the nickname of Lord Hoth due to an overwhelming militaristic victory on Hoth had gathered his own champions to form what is known as the Army of Light. This was comprised of many Jedi Lords and their own feudal armies of Jedi Knights from across the stars. The Grand Council would declare all Lords of the Jedi united as an Army of Light. Adding on to this number was Lord Valentine Farfalla, an eccentric man who commanded one of the largest fighting companies of Force wielders ever seen, an army of 100 trained Jedi Knights and Esquires. He distinguished himself by his strange battleships, and were remarkably made from the timber of the Warshire trees of Kashyyyk and extremely durable. His wooden-hulled battleships looked like something out of a fairy tale as he descended upon battles in his glittering battle armor and flourishing golden lightsaber. Hoth could not stand him, but the two managed to work together on driving back the Sith threat in earnest. The Army of Light settled on the world of Ruusan and used it as a staging ground to harass the Sith stronghold at Kashyyyk. But Lord Kaan would attempt to bait Hoth into a winner-take-all showdown with him by attacking the worlds of Bespin and Sullust. And then finally he overwhelmed the world of Ruusan. The now overconfident Lord Kaan decided it was time to strike at the core, and he ordered his legions to assail the planets of Kurulag, Chandrila, and Brintal in an effort to choke off both the Hydean Way and the Perlemian trade route in a single blow. The Republic appeared as though it would crumble under the assault, and many wondered where Hoth had gone to. But Lord Kaan had miscalculated on where Hoth would appear next, and the Army of Light decided to take back Ruusan now that Kaan's forces were occupied elsewhere. This would begin one of the bloodiest series of battles between the Jedi and Sith that the galaxy has ever seen. As Kaan returned to Ruusan with the new recruits from his Sith Academy, the Ruusan campaign began. This would be a saga of 7 gory battles fought in the miserable, muddy conditions of the planet. The two ideological opposites put everything they had on the table, as this would be the battle to determine the fate of the galaxy. However, the dragging war of attrition left both sides completely demoralized. The Brotherhood of Darkness lost all but 2 of the battles, reducing their once fearsome army to a 1/10 of its original size. Meanwhile, Jedi casualties grew so common that the Order sanctioned recruits to seek out able-bodied Republic citizens with any hint of Force sensitivity to join their ranks. Many who were drafted into the war effort were actual children who were given cursory training with the lightsaber before being shoved out into the meat grinder on the front lines. In the Ruusan campaign, the lines between light and darkness began to blur until either side even knew who they were anymore. Lord Hoth was teetering dangerously close to the dark side and isolating himself from his friends that had tried to support him, while Lord Kaan descended into pure madness. The war had also defoliated the planet of Ruusan and drove the peaceful native wildlife into viciousness. The devastation on the world, the galaxy, and the Force itself was palpable. This was truly the breaking point. But ironically, the salvation of the Republic would come in the form of a Sith, Darth Bane. He would arrive and begin guiding the Sith through a ritual which devastated a huge swath of the Force life as a way to root out the Jedi. But Bane had secretly betrayed his Sith brethren. He had since come up with the philosophy of the Rule of Two, and decided that in order for the Sith to truly survive and rule, they would need to be remade. Only 2 could exist, no more, no less. Kaan's Brotherhood, he decided, was an abomination to the dark side. So Bane manipulated the Sith blockade over Ruusan to attack the Republic fleet, leaving a hole for Lord Farfalla to arrive with Jedi reinforcements. This sent Lord Kaan into a panic, allowing Bane to take advantage of his deranged mental state and convince him to detonate what is known as the Thought Bomb. a ritual that would consume the souls of both the Jedi and Sith in one cataclysmic blast. Hoth would take with him 100 other Jedi volunteers and confront the Mad Khan in the caverns of Ruusan, while the Sith conducted the ritual. Khan detonated the blast early, consuming the souls of all Force sensitives present, and within the radius of several miles. Darth Bane, meanwhile, had gotten out of dodge. In the end, the thought bomb had decimated the surface of all of Ruusan, mutating it into a broken wasteland. But at long last, the Sith Order was now over, defeated, and all but extinct. All except for one, Bane. Bane, who would take his apprentice in the form of a young Zana and go into hiding immediately. But the galaxy, trembling, sobbing, and blood-soaked, would finally drift into a hushed, aching stillness. Part 2. The Time of Peace. In 1000 BBY, following the end of the new Sith Wars, Supreme Chancellor Tarsis would announce that the Republic and its citizens knew it no longer existed. Major actions would need to be taken in order to heal the galaxy and to bring it back to unity. And from this came the Ruusan Reformation, a document which would change the Galactic Republic and the Jedi Order for the foreseeable future. The Reformation saw the full dismantling of central authority concerning economic, political, and military power. The Senate would consolidate from millions of sectors into just 1,024 of them, each with their own representative in the Senate. This act would diminish the governmental authority of the Chancellor and give greater control to planetary systems and sectors, thereby giving the Senate unprecedented levels of power. Although many important core worlds continued to retain their own individual sectors, this would become a point of contention later. But for the war-weary galaxy, the most impactful of the changes was the abolishment of the Republic's armed forces. The standing military was reorganized as the Judicial Forces, which was a relatively small assemblage of task forces and rapid response fleets, those to respond to crisis and patrol the frontier. This was a much more toned-down version of the previous military and the Grand Navy that the Republic once boasted. There were also many restrictions placed on the fleet sizes and armament that individual sectors were allowed to have. This would reduce the likelihood of local conflicts breaking out once again and having a larger impact on the galaxy. The Ruusan Reformations indeed saved the Republic from total implosion, and its restricting laid the groundwork for the galaxy to once again thrive. However, unbeknownst to anyone just yet, by giving every senator a powerful voice, Tarsis Valorum had invited gridlock and greed. Frustrations with the new system would continue to grow among the populace throughout the following centuries. But perhaps the most impacted by the Ruusan Reformations were the Jedi, who made some major and fundamental changes to their order. They had to disband the Army of Light and relinquish all their ground vehicles and warships, which became a part of the Republic Judicial Department. The Jedi themselves were also codified as a branch of the Judicial Department itself, which now officially made them answerable to the Senate. A few Jedi objected to this, but the Council said that it was to reinforce that they were ideally counselors and advisors, not warriors. But little did they know that this was the exact point in which the Jedi started becoming political, rather than truly following the way of the Force. In addition to this, the High Council decreed that all Jedi Lords should give up their titles and land, returning to the more monastic lifestyle that the Order thought was proper. This led to the dissolution of the Grand Council, and all Jedi returning to Coruscant. Also, a new plan was made by the Council to hopefully stop so many Sith from coming from their own students. To decrease the chance that a far-flung academy may stumble into dangerous explorations of the Force, Jedi training was now consolidated to only the Temple on Coruscant. Along with this, Jedi trainees would be taken into the Order as infants before they could become exposed to the temptations of the material galaxy. Heretofore, Jedi Masters and students were recruited from childhood or young adulthood and could train at any of the enclaves around the galaxy, but the Ruusan Reformations changed this and made it so that almost all younglings must be trained together at a central temple. The Jedi were given new shape and new life in this period. The peace-loving Grandmaster Fey Coven worked tirelessly to restore their damaged reputation among citizens of the galaxy, while also trying to make the Order work more effectively. With the Sith now gone, they could take off their armor, use their lightsabers much more sparingly. The year is 896 BBY. This is when Yoda was born, and he would eventually make his way through the Jedi Order, becoming a prominent figure in its formation during this time. Economic forces shaped the galaxy, and the Republic entered a period of prosperity and financial growth. Through the wise leadership of several extraordinary chancellors, society was rebuilt, which fueled renowned exploration and colonization of the galaxy's northern and southern reaches. The Republic continued to withstand challenges such as the brief resurgence of the Mandalorians. The final incursion would lead to the Mandalorian Civil War, which saw their violent, warrior-like ways being fractured, broken into smaller clans. The main faction that came to rule Mandalore declared themselves as a pacifist society, but remained independent away from the Republic. However, the Republic's prosperity masked flaws and fault lines, particularly those in the core, colonies, as well as the Inner Rim, along with the systems that are farther out. The rule of law was often taken for granted in the core, but merely theoretical in the Mid and the Outer Rim. Wealthy worlds colonized new planets in the Rim with scant regard for the rights of indigenous species, and megacorporation used unexplored space for commercial exploration. Particularly in the Outer Rim, central authority was often so weak to the point of being non-existent, and abuses went unchecked. The abolition of a central military may have stopped the Republic itself from abusing power, but it left outlying systems and sectors struggling to defend themselves against pirates, slavers, and small-time despots. How to solve this problem was the subject of considerable debate in the Senate. One faction that many called the militarists would argue that central authority was the best answer, and called for the Republic to break the Ruusan Reformations and once more create a single army and navy. But others feared renewed militarism, arguing that with the right incentives, the galaxy's private sector would open up trade, which would in turn spur demands for political freedom and knit the galaxy back together as one. By this point, many worlds in the Outer Rim turned to megacorporations for protection, trading their freedom for security, which is where the Trade Federation would gain power. It was in 350 BBY that the Trade Federation came into existence to represent the needs of major shipping conglomerates, which also was mediating disputes between these companies. Many of these shipping corporations were choking off commerce by shutting out competitors from Rim spaceports and refusing to share navigational information with them. The Federation originally helped curb these abuses, and after a while it became a major shipping cartel in its own right. By around 250 BBY, the Trade Federation left its original mission behind and became a powerful association, one working to advance trade interests in the Senate. In the beginning, they were a good company and opened up new regions of the galaxy for commerce. But while they had begun as a benevolent industry, they were soon corrupted with greed. The power accelerated the unprecedented levels for them, and in 124 BBY, the Senate would approve two significant pieces of legislation. First, portions of the Mid and the Outer Rim were declared a free trade zone, and were exempt from the sometimes oppressive taxes levied by local systems, sectors, and regions. And secondly, the ability to have representation in the Senate was extended to trading guilds and corporations as well. The fear of pirates and slavers had strangled trade and economic production in the Rim worlds, breeding political isolation. The Senate had hoped that by passing these two laws, that it would jumpstart commerce in the Mid and the Outer Rim as well, thereby mending the relationship between the core and the Rim worlds through trade ties. These efforts did indeed spur economic development, but the cost was a further weakening of Republic's central power and even further protection from poor, remote worlds. The ones who really profited from these changes was the Trade Federation. The cartel moved ruthlessly in the Rim, striking hard bargains with impoverished systems that did more to benefit the Federation than they did to stimulate economic growth. These predatory treaties essentially handed over Senate votes of entire sectors to the Trade Federation, and within a generation, the cartel commanded sufficient Senate votes to hamper its competitors and to tie up grievances made against them in the courts. They were almost invincible simply by using political loopholes. By the final decades of the Republic, it was clear that some kind of reckoning was at hand. Large portions of the Rim were abandoned to the growing power of the Hutts, or exploited by corporate senators. In many systems, megacorporations were the only law, and they were concerned with profits, not the rights of citizens, environmental protections, or even economic development. This was essentially brought back slavery right under the Republic's nose. But dealings in the core were also equally crooked. Many politicians were either in the pockets of these mega companies or were simply too frightened to stand up to them. As a result, the Jedi, who were now under the thumb of the Senate, could do nothing about the sentience rights violations, and were forced to turn a blind eye. The senatorial faction known as the Militarists continued to seek to restore order by reviving the centralized military, but many reformists refused to work with them due to their suspicion. The Republic once again began to fragment, this time not under war, but under the burdens of terrible bureaucracy. Money, greed, and injustice were what ruled the galaxy now, and the Republic was too ineffectual to do anything. This is the type of corruption that is beyond the Jedi and their lightsabers, or their Force abilities. However, the Jedi did notice that the shape of the Force abruptly seemed to flux. The Jedi Masters most in tune with the unifying Force studied this puzzle in quiet meditation. All of them reported the same thing. The murkiness, the uncertainty, the looming sense of dread all pointed to the growing power of the dark side. And it is from within that disorder that a senator from Naboo decided to make his emergence, Sheev Palpatine. He walked with a handsome and a kind smiling face, but behind him, his shadow stretched back 1,000 years to the rule of 2. For too long, the Sith had thrown themselves ceaselessly at the Republic from the outside, smacking their faces against a wall that would not move. For too long, their armies had failed to bring down this bastion of democracy no matter how close they got. But now, Darth Sidious walked the halls of the Galactic Senate, and each one of his footsteps echoed with the triumphant cackles of the long-dead Dark Lords of the Sith. Part 3. The Beginning of the End. Over the course of the next several decades, Palpatine would exploit the divisions between the core and the rim while manipulating the Trade Federation as well, seeing that the galaxy stood poised on the verge of war that would destroy the Republic. And in 52 BBY, the Nebula Front, a resistance group, had emerged vowing to thwart the Trade Federation by any means necessary. They would begin by attacking the Trade Federation shipping, intensifying the cartel's calls that it be allowed to defend itself through the creation of an army of droids. The Nebula Front's list of grievances won sympathy in the Senate, but most feared the growing power that the Trade Federation now held and its allies, the Corporate Alliance and the Intergalactic Banking Clan. In 46 BBY, Darth Sidious manufactured a shortage of Bacta, the healing powder drug that had been the mainline medicine in the galaxy ever since it had replaced the outdated Kolto. The Federation jacked up the prices and began selling Bacta at a premium rate, causing major issues on the galactic market. This would lead to an event known as the Stark Hyperspace War, when the pirate entrepreneur Iako Stark began raiding Trade Federation shipments, but then would begin reselling them at a bargain price. Chancellor Finis Valorum attempted to end the crisis with a diplomatic summit on the planet of Trokeen. Many Jedi Consulars and Guardians attended this summit, including the Wookiee Jedi Master Tyvaka and his Padawan Plo Koon. However, the situation exploded into war when the pirate Stark attempted to take the negotiators hostage, leading to the death of Master Tyvaka. Meanwhile, Iriadu's militarist senator, Ranulf Tarkin, had assembled a battle fleet which had falsely referred to as the Republic Navy in a bit of bombastic propaganda, and sped to Trokeen to attack Stark's forces. But once he got there, Tarkin's fleet was decimated by the Navicomputer virus uploaded to the ships by Stark, resulting in Tarkin's death. Stark would then defect to the Republic and help end the crisis in return for legal pardon with the Trade Federation. And while the Federation agreed to lend its freighters to a Jedi rescue mission which had taken the President during these events, the crisis would pass, with both the Trade Federation and the Republic being weakened and radicalized against one another. And although the Jedi had helped, relations were sore. The Bacta thefts turned out to be a ruse cooked up by Iako Stark, but also the Viceroy of the Trade Federation. And of course, Palpatine was behind it as well. The result of the Star Hyperspace War was that the Trade Federation now had real weight behind them, and even more weight behind their demands for a droid army for security. The Sith Lord continued manipulating events during Valorum's terms as Chancellor. As Palpatine, he worked his way into the Chancellor's inner circle. As Sidious, he revealed himself to several high-ranking Namordians in the Trade Federation. He promised them great power and wealth in exchange for a partnership. He helped strike deals with a number of the key Rim worlds, giving them even more power in the Senate. And all the while, he began to orchestrate some isolated conflicts to test the Republic and the Jedi. This would include the Yinchorri Uprising of 33 BBY, At this point, the Jedi Order numbered more than 10,000 and could vanquish any enemy if they were permitted to do so. But the judicial department bureaucracy tied the hands of the Jedi and often left them shockingly ineffectual, and the Yinchorri Uprising was an incident that would prove this. The Yinchorri were a reptilian species that had crafted lightsaber-resistant cortosis weave armor. Around this point, they controlled several worlds in the Yinchorri system, and were starting to attack neighboring planets out of arrogance and bloodthirst. The Jedi-friendly Chancellor Valorum dispatched some Jedi negotiators to assess the situation, but within a few days' time, the Yinchorri dumped their bodies on Valorum's doorstep. The High Council could have, and should have responded to the crisis with overwhelming force. But instead, the Senate only permitted them to send 3 cruisers to put down the uprising. Although the team carried some of the best Jedi of the time, including Mace Windu, Adi Gallia, Eth Koth, Plo Koon, Micah Gillett, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Yinchorri had their lightsaber-resistant armor and the inside information from Darth Sidious. Yoda himself stopped the Yinchorri assault made against the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, while Windu's team walked into a bloodbath on the worlds of the Yinchorri system. Jedi casualties began to mount, until Chancellor Valorum finally won Senate approval of an emergency blockade of the Yinchorri system, forcing the usurpers to surrender. The entire debacle accomplished many things for Palpatine. It made Valorum look foolish and ineffective, weak, defeated a species that Sidious feared, killed Jedi, and renewed calls for a standing military in the Republic. Soon after that, Sidious launched his master plan amid growing violence between the Trade Federation and the Nebula Front. Palpatine convinced Valorum to propose a tax on the free trade zones in the Outer Rim. He did this to undo the advantages enjoyed by the Trade Federation, the Corporate Alliance, and the Intergalactic Banking Clan. In return, the Federation would have to be allowed to take whatever steps it deemed necessary to protect its many vessels. Valorum, not seeing an alternative, took Palpatine's advice in the matter, but the consequences were dire. His speech boosted anti-Trade Federation feelings in the militarist camp of the Senate, and the repeal of the free trade zones would unite Federation, Alliance, and the IGBC together. These corporations would later be key foundational members in the Confederation of Independent Systems. However, the Federation was able to finally construct their droid army, and Darth Sidious's plan was coming to fruition. Valorum had been weakened, the militarist camp was gaining adherence in the Senate, suspicions were rising between the core and the Rim, and the Trade Federation was now entirely in Sidious's pocket. This finally led to the event that would change everything, the Naboo Crisis of 32 BBY. In angry protests of the taxation of the Outer Rim trade routes, the Trade Federation carried out their threats to blockade the planet of Naboo. This was a big deal because the plasma export of Naboo was vital to the Republic. Of course, the cowardly Namordians would never have been brave enough to do this on their own though. It was Sidious who told them to do it in order to test out their new droid army, which had grown far larger than the Republic protocol would have normally allowed. Valorum realized he had to do something radical to shore up his crumbling support, and so he exploited his friendship with the Jedi, going directly to the High Council to request mediators. This completely broke protocol by neglecting to inform the Senate of this decision. The Council would eventually select Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi to apply direct pressure to the Trade Federation to squeeze Viceroy Gunray. Gunray knew the mission couldn't have had the Senate approval and contacted Sidious immediately, who was also somewhat blindsided by the audacity of Valorum. He ordered the Viceroy to kill the Jedi, destroy their ship, and invade Naboo. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan escaped the attempt on their life and rescued Queen Amidala quickly. They then convinced her to run the blockade in hopes of bringing the word of the invasion to Coruscant. However, during their escape, the royal starship was damaged, diverting their trip to the Hutt world of Tatooine. While Qui-Gon attempted to secure the hyperdrive parts needed for the ship, another unexpected development occurred. He would encounter a young slave boy with an unprecedented power in the Force. His midichlorian count exceeded anything the Jedi had ever seen, including that of Grandmaster Yoda's. Qui-Gon, who was always more in tune with the living Force and deeply believed in prophecy, mused that perhaps this young boy was the chosen one of legend. The slave boy Anakin Skywalker raced in the Bunta Eve pod race, winning both his freedom and the parts necessary for their ship. Master Qui-Gon decided to take him with them on their mission, determined to have the boy trained as a Jedi. But Sidious, not willing to have this mission be jeopardized, sent his apprentice Darth Maul to deal with the Jedi personally. At last, it was time for the Sith to reveal themselves. Qui-Gon and the group narrowly escaped an attack by the mysterious Sith assassin and skipped back to Coruscant. Back on the capital world, Amidala's efforts to persuade the Senate to help Naboo was hamstrung by bureaucracy and ultimately came to nothing. Palpatine would be there to take advantage of the young queen's frustration though, and manipulated her to call a vote of no confidence in the already unpopular Chancellor Valorum. Amidala was then determined to return to Naboo and resist the Trade Federation occupation herself, since the Republic was of no help to her. The rest of the Jedi Council knew that their authority also stopped at the edges of the Senate's decision-making. However, they managed to open up a loophole by charging Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan with the Queen's continued protection. In doing this, the Jedi Order technically wasn't getting directly involved, but simply sending 2 Jedi to ensure the Queen's safety. They could not be blamed for anything that happened as a result of that. On Naboo, the Allied Gungans fought the Trade Federation army out in the Battle of the Great Grass Plains, but did so as only a distraction. Their fighting allowed Amidala to lead a raid on the occupied city of Theed, during which Viceroy Gunray was captured. The Jedi and the Sith then entered the Duel of Fates, the first public Jedi and Sith clash in 1,000 years. Maul got the honor of announcing the Sith's triumphant return by taking the life of Qui-Gon Jinn, only then to be promptly defeated by the young Obi-Wan Kenobi. However, victory was only assured when the young Anakin destroyed the droid control ship, which shut down the Federation's battle droids on the surface of Naboo. The Battle of Naboo was a loss for the Trade Federation, but in Darth Sidious, he had gotten everything that he wanted. Sympathy for Naboo allowed him to secure the office of the Chancellor, giving the levelers of the Republic's power to the grasp of the Sith. The dangerous Qui-Gon Jinn was now out of the way, perhaps being one of the only Jedi who could see through the veil of the dark side that had now been placed over the eyes of the wider order. This event had also made the Republic Senate look ineffective, which bred even more distrust between the core and the Rim worlds. Furthermore, the death of Qui-Gon led to Dooku leaving the Jedi and becoming Sidious's new apprentice. Through Dooku, he learned that Master Sifo Dyas had arranged the creation of a secret clone army without the Jedi Council's knowledge. While Sidious fully intended to reman the Republic, now was not the time, and a Jedi Master who'd foreseen a coming war could ruin his plans quickly. So, in proof of loyalty, Sidious had Dooku murder his dear friend Sifo Dyas, erase the cloning world of Kamino from the Jedi archives, and take control of the cloning program by using a template that he himself had selected, Jango Fett. 5 years later, in 27 BBY, Anakin Skywalker would be well on his way in his Jedi training. Meanwhile, a Jedi Master by the name of Joruus C'baoth brought a new exploratory proposal before Palpatine. C'baoth's project, named the Outbound Flight, would send 45,000 colonists through the unknown regions. The Jedi Master believed that with the Force's guiding touch, exploring this heretofore untouched region of space could be made possible. He recommended that himself and 17 other Jedi Knights accompany the outbound colonists on their journey. Palpatine cared much less about the project as he did about the prospect of freely murdering several prominent Jedi, and the project proved to be convenient, and so he allowed C'baoth to move forward, but would sabotage the outbound flight. The project launched from Yaga Minor, but would only get as far as the unknown regions before they ran headfirst into the Chiss Ascendancy, as well as the brilliant mastermind that would one day become known as Grand Admiral Thrawn. As far as the rest of the galaxy was concerned, the outbound flight mysteriously vanished and was never heard from again, which was not so uncommon for exploration missions in the unknown regions, and so it was written off as another tragedy and never looked into. As the Jedi continued to put out various fires across the galaxy, the one that they were purposefully ignoring was the growing issue of the Confederacy. And things were about to get worse. In 24 BBY, Count Dooku made his grand return as a political activist in the Outer Rim territories. On the industrial powerhouse world of Raxus Prime, he would give an impassioned speech about the corruption that consumed the Republic, and rallied star systems to join his new government. The Confederacy of Independent Systems is what he was calling it, later to be known as the CIS, or the Separatist Movement. In public, he swayed planets and commercial concerns to his side, but in private, as Darth Tyrannus, he began recruiting and training Dark Acolytes. This would include a Dathomirian named Ventress, a cybernetically armored Jedi by the name of Dirge, and a wide array of various darkside wielders. But the greatest among them was called General Grievous, a Kaleesh warlord who had his body transformed into a cyborg that could wield 4 lightsabers at once and kill just about any Jedi that stepped up to him. Not coincidentally, Dooku's reemergence corresponded with the end of Palpatine's 8-year term as Chancellor. However, with the upstart of the Confederacy and the secession of many systems, this had startled the Senate, not to mention the now frightening droid army at their back. All of this was enough for them to vote Palpatine an indefinite extension to his term that would lead them through this dangerous crisis. Most of them had simply hoped that Palpatine would bring about a swift end to what looked like a foolhardy act of political dreamer. But in just a single year, Dooku's movement had grown significantly more powerful. Every day saw another world joining, and the senators thought perhaps the Chancellor should let them go to allow the Confederacy to exist peacefully with the Republic. However, others pushed for the passage of military creation to bolster their meager judicial department. Dooku, though, by now had gained a great following from the Separatist movement. For some members, the changes in allegiance came through violence. The most infamous of these examples is Antar IV and Ando, who both announced their secession with bombings and blaster fire. Corellia removed itself entirely from the crisis and attended its own affairs by leaving the Republic but remaining isolated. The Republic now looked weak, and Palpatine's non-committal stance on commissioning a Republic military and a navy force did not help the Republic at all. Meanwhile, Dooku achieved the help of many major companies to support the CIS, which would include the Intergalactic Banking Clan, the Techno Union, the Bactoid armor worship on Geonosis. However, Newt Gunray, who still controlled the Trade Federation from the shadows, stubbornly refused to sign up to the Confederacy until Dooku could deliver Padme's head. Several assassination attempts were then made against Padme's life, ordered by Dooku to Jango Fett. While Anakin followed Padme back to Naboo for her protection, his Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi would follow the assassin's trail back to a world known as Kamino. There, Obi-Wan stumbled upon the ready-to-go clone army, which was apparently under contract for the Republic. After reporting this to the Jedi Council, Kenobi tracked Jango to Geonosis, where he discovered that Jango had made a contract with a Dooku. Not only this, but he uncovered the Geonosian droid factory, which was producing an army en masse. Obi-Wan managed to transmit word of this back to the Council before he was discovered and captured. Nearby to Geonosis, Anakin Skywalker and Padme had been guided to Tatooine by agonizing visions of Anakin's dying mother. However, he could not prevent her death at the hands of the Tusken Raiders and got his first real taste of the dark side of the Force. After this, the two would travel to Geonosis to rescue Kenobi, only to be captured now themselves.
Good job.
The three ended up in an execution arena, and by salvation came 200 Jedi, one of the largest Jedi armies assembled in history, led boldly by Mace Windu. Dooku would then boldly reveal the truth of the droid army, just as Yoda arrived carrying the first 200,000 clone troopers from Kamino. In a convenient matter of time, no sooner had Chancellor Palpatine authorized the creation of a centralized army than one materialized to intervene this very day. The Battle of Geonosis became a trial by fire for the Republic's Grand Army that day, and the first conflict of what would become known as the Clone Wars. So now we reach the finale, the final twilight of the Republic. War. Blaster pulse emissions choke out the atmosphere in every possibly inhabited world that we could think of. Not a single planet along the rim had silence from the sound of the heavy machinery stomping and rolling across the plains and landscapes. Capital ships met in the combat that made it as though the stars themselves were in a blazing battle of light with one another. In gleaming white armor, the Grand Army of the Republic charged into the fray against the unthinking, unfeeling, and sometimes seemingly unstoppable battle droid army. But they were led by the Jedi, who had reluctantly taken up the title of the General once more at the behest of the Senate. Fashioning new armor for themselves, or in Anakin Skywalker's case, digging up the armor of the Old Republic. Their lightsabers saw more use in 3 years than many had seen in a decade. Obi-Wan, Anakin, and his young Padawan Ahsoka Tano won accolades for their battles, such as enemies as Ventress, Dooku, and bounty hunters like Cad Bane and Dirge, and of course, the dreaded General Grievous. But it all began immediately after the Battle of Geonosis in the year 22 BBY. As soon as Dooku escaped nearly being captured by the Jedi Grandmaster, he wasted no time in issuing a declaration of war. And for the final time in 25,000 years, the Republic would find itself embroiled in a galaxy-wide conflict that would soon swallow it whole. The Confederacy moved swiftly to sink its hooks deeper into the industrial-heavy mid-rim worlds and to occupy key hyperspace nodes to ease development of their droid army on all potential battlefields. As Dooku found out, many systems needed only the slightest push to break from the Republic, and the northern corridor of the mid-rim part of the slice became the foundry of the CIS. It seemed many in the galaxy saw the blood in the water and knew it was the Republic's final hour. The Separatists constantly sought a technological advantage over the Republic, throwing seemingly endless number of battle droids, droidekas, and advanced assassin droids into the fray of the war, spending billions of credits on researching deadly new superweapons. And on the primitive world of Mara Dun, the amoral Separatists tested bioweapon missiles that destroyed living things while sparing machinery. They were luckily stopped by Anakin, Ahsoka, and Aayla Secura. But elsewhere among the stars, Dooku decided to look into the annals of history for inspiration. He then located the Dark Reaper Sith weapon once used by the Jedi Ulic Qel-Droma. Dooku unearthed it on Raxus Prime and used it to seize Ren Var, Elaris, Mon Calamari, Bakura, and Agamar. The Dark Reaper was incomplete and only had a fraction of its army desolating power, but its ability to hit large targets spread so far across the galaxy at an alarming rate caused the Jedi High Council a ton of concern. Anakin had managed to shut down the device on the Sith world of Thule, but that didn't stop the CIS from obsessively using more and more weapons. Among the others would be the B-2 super battle droids, made out of pure cortosis, which were meant to be unleashed on the Jedi, of course. But then we have the ship known as the Malevolence. This enormous battleship sported powerful ion cannons that could neutralize entire fleets in a single blast. The Separatists used this to raid numerous core and colony systems before its destruction at Antar once again. Destroyed again thanks to Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Ahsoka Tano. In an early bid for victory, Dooku's forces grabbed control of a hyperspace route in the Outer Rim, severing the Republic from many of its key armies and territories. The Republic had managed to break through this with a hard-won victory on Christophsis. Anakin's subsequent rescue of Jabba the Hutt's son would lead to a treaty that allowed the Republic to utilize Hutt space hyperlanes instead, thereby restoring their supply line connection to the Outer Rim territories. Besides Christophsis and Teth though, the battlefields of the first year of the Clone Wars included Bathawi, Falin, Rishi, Abrigado, Atraken, Kashyyyk, Eskara, Ryloth, and Ossus. The Separatists attempted 2 separate times to attack Kamino and shut down all of the clone facilities, but both times they would fail, repelled by the Republic and the Jedi. The first Battle of Kamino was when the legendary ARC troopers were unveiled, powerful clones that could think outside of the box of the normal confines of a regular trooper. A squad of ARCs were as effective as an entire battalion of regular clones. But at the same time, the Separatists would unleash their own special elite unit. At the Battle of Hypori, the Jedi would meet General Grievous for the very first time, and he would take his entrance utterly by wrecking several members of the Jedi Council at once, including Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, Shaak Ti, and Kakruk. Elsewhere, Aayla Secura fought bravely on worlds such as Kel, while Jedi Master Mace Windu and the Twi'lek revolutionary Kam Syndulla attempted to drive the Techno-Union's armies off of Ryloth. In this era, even the Grand Master brandished his lightsaber, defending such worlds as Rugosa, Ilum, and Axion. But while many brave Jedi laid down their lives in the Clone Wars, others repelled at the idea of military service to a corrupt republic, and many of them defected to Dooku. And towards the end of the first year, Grievous's scorched earth mentality and assault had terrified the Republic, and numerous failed attempts were made to bring him to justice. But the droid proved to be elusive. When he wasn't actively slaughtering Jedi with the most unfair of tactics, Grievous was frustratingly evading capture time and time again. With all of that said though, the Clone Wars was never what it seemed, for the whole thing was simply a carefully engineered ruse by Sidious. Sidious played a chess game with himself. Each Republic victory was followed by a precisely planned Republic defeat. For example, the Separatist strike on Kamino, and this ultimately failed. But it failed not due to any defect in the strategy, but because Sidious sabotaged the attack to guarantee neither side would bag a victory here. Palpatine used uncertainty and terror as tools to keep the Republic afraid, which made them yield more and more emergency powers to him, the Chancellor. Soon, Sidious turned the uses of the bioweapons to spread chaos and fear among the Republic. virus droids spreading nanoviruses engineered to target clone troopers' genetic structures. Weapons like Ventress and Dirge exterminated all life on one of Naboo's moons with a plague, and the Blue Shadow virus was nearly unleashed on the entirety of Naboo, the same virus that he had once completely used to depopulate the world of Candoria. Luckily, this attempt was stopped by the Jedi, who arrested the Separatist researcher. This all goes to show that Palpatine did not even want to spare his own homeworld if it meant playing a role in his larger plan. Major Republic victories were indeed won in the first year, however, as the Battle of Moonalist finally saw Obi-Wan Kenobi defeat Dirge, who Kenobi had previously watched brutally murder several prominent Jedi. The Battle of Mon Calamari had Kit Fisto utilize his innovated waterproof lightsaber to destroy the Quarren superweapon, a weapon which would fire at orbital targets from beneath the ocean. Mace Windu single-handedly ended the Separatist occupation of Dantooine, annihilating a stomping machine which was able to eradicate entire armies. Because numbers of the clone troopers were limited in the first year though, the Republic and the Separatists traded blows back and forth, with the Grand Army having to rely heavily on subterfuge to even the odds. The second year of the Clone Wars was characterized by many Separatist gains and Republic embarrassments. Sullust joined the Confederacy due to its corporate ties with the Commerce Guild, thus pushing the Republic to fortify its base on Iriadu as a staging area for naval raids. In the core, Kuat and Neimoidia planted hyperlanes between them with mines, rendering the very center of the Hydean Way impassable now. But one of the greatest punches to the gut was the horrendous defeat at the Battle of Jabim. The Republic slogged miserably through the rain and the mud in a grueling campaign against the Separatist-aligned warlords. There, Anakin witnessed every Jedi, Master and Padawan in his company die brutally, and he believed his master Obi-Wan to have died with them. After, Anakin was met with an impossible choice: have the Republic retreat off of the world, leaving the Jabim freedom fighters to fend for themselves against the droids, or die fighting with his men in the mud. Although Obi-Wan turned out to be fine and was soon rescued, this was a formative battle for the young Anakin, who would be forever changed by the Battle of Jabim. Further Republic losses occurred on the world of Aragora, Saria, Parkelius Minor, and Togorio. The long string of Republic defeats culminated with the Separatists penetrating the core and seizing the world of Duro. From this new position, Grievous wreaked destruction onto the Corellian trade spine. The fresh fighting in the core spread to the Techno-Union shipyards of the Forrost, and the Republic blockade of this world failed with the Separatists as they broke through and began hitting worlds such as Alaskan, Basilisk, and Anaxes. Grievous unleashed an orbital bombardment on the ancient city planet of Humbarine, and unleashed a brain plague on the world of Lordovia. All of these monstrous depravities struck terror into the citizens of the core worlds, and a band of rogue Jedi attempted to assassinate Grievous here on Gentes, but only became the latest to die to his 4 blades. It was only in the third year that the Republic finally began to gain traction. Yoda helped put down a Dark Jedi Uprising, while Anakin's victory on the world of Pre-Sitlin secured the first Republic victory on the southern portion of the Rim since the very beginning of the war. With battles finally starting to go their way in the stages throughout the core, colonies, and the Inner Rim, the Republic kept up the pressure on the Rimward holdings, repositioning its fleets and then initiating the Outer Rim sieges. The citizens of the Republic were wary of the war and terrified of the deadly Separatist incursions. The war seemed like it was going to drag on forever, but the reality was actually quite different. What Palpatine kept hidden was that the Republic was actually winning. The Republic had finally directed a substantial portion of its industrial might to the war effort, and just as history constantly displayed, its production vastly outperformed the Separatist capabilities. New laws and amendments untangled the Republic's competing jurisdictions, which gave the Chancellor the ability to direct production and military assets quickly and efficiently. The economic powers that had kept the Separatists moving were under a terrible strain, and the citizens of the Confederacy no longer believed the Republic would sue for peace, and that instead, they only wanted annihilation. By this point, the CIS had been ejected from their bases in the core and the colonies, and been driven back to the Mid and the Outer Rim. The main thrust of the Outer Rim sieges came in 6 theaters, which were named the Maigito, Sereno, Felucia, Siskine, Yagdol, and the Praestalin. The theaters of war didn't take place exclusively on these worlds, but were named after them since they were the focal points of all battles in each of the 6 territories. Republic forces were making progress in all 6 campaigns, and cleaning up remaining Separatist resistance elsewhere. Plo Koon was breaking down the enemy defenses on one planet, clearing the way for Ki-Adi Mundi to assault Maigito. The fiercest fighting came in the Felucian Theater though, as this was home to many of the Confederacy's key factory worlds. Pivotal battles happened on Kashyyyk, Boz Pidi, Saleucami, and Felucia. General Grievous had decided to keep the pressure on towards the core worlds to make the Republic feel afraid, and deceive them into thinking that they were not doing as well in the war as they actually were. But once the sieges of the Outer Rim worlds began, it was clear that the Republic was about to win. Grievous made a daring strike at Coruscant though through a secret hyperlane, attacking the capital directly, and even capturing the Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, which was of course all a part of the plan. Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi by now were considered the greatest warriors of the Republic, and were pulled from the Outer Rim sieges immediately back to Coruscant, as the Council deeply believed that only they could rescue Palpatine. The two climbed aboard Grievous's ship, the Invisible Hand, and faced down Dooku in a final duel. The contest of sabers resulted in Anakin giving into the dark side yet again, and beheading the Count. Afterwards, Grievous escaped yet again, and the duo guided the ruined Invisible Hand to crash landing on Coruscant, while the Republic forces beat the Separatist fleet back into the Rim. The cause of the Confederacy of Independent Systems now seemed completely doomed without Dooku leading them. And yet, Palpatine ordered the Jedi generals to press the attack rather than negotiate for peace. This prompted the Separatist leadership to evacuate from Utapau to Mustafar, fearing complete annihilation. Windu, however, grew convinced that the Chancellor wanted to prolong the war by his own ends, and Anakin soon learned the truth of Palpatine's identity. He was a Sith, Sidious. This came after Anakin began having visions of his wife Padme's death, the same way that he had dreams of his mother's passing. Palpatine tactfully began manipulating his promises of saving his wife using Sith and forbidden knowledge. Although heavily conflicted, Anakin revealed this to the High Council. But with Yoda busy repulsing the droid attack on the Wookiees, and Obi-Wan tracking Grievous on Utapau, it was up to Windu to lead the arrest on the Chancellor. But this did not go as Windu thought. Despite bringing with him some of the finest blade masters in the Order, none of them were prepared for what the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith Lord history actually looked like. The frighteningly powerful Sidious cut down his attackers, and was aided in the end by Anakin Skywalker, who surrendered himself to the desperate rage of the dark side. Christened Lord Vader by Sidious, he then led the 501st Legion to exterminate the Jedi at the Temple. And finally, Palpatine triggered his long-awaited plan, his masterpiece, Order 66. In the span of just a few brief moments, the Jedi from across the galaxy fell under the blaster fire of the clone troopers that they had commanded for years now, their friends. Many of them never even knew the Sith had been the ones behind it all. Obi-Wan had just eliminated General Grievous in an act that should have been triumphant and brought a close to the war. However, he too was betrayed in this moment, forcing Kenobi to flee Utapau and meet up with the meager allies that remained, Yoda and Bail Organa. Afterwards, Sidious would personally summon all of the senators to an emergency meeting. Here, he gave a speech elaborating on a supposed plot that the Jedi had to assassinate and destroy the Republic, to claim control of the Senate. The terrified Republic lapped up every single one of Sidious's words, as over the course of the entire Clone War, the public had been fed a steady stream of propaganda that made the Jedi look terrifying, capable of turning to the dark side. And when Palpatine then declared that in order to facilitate a safer and a secure society, the Republic would be reorganized into the first Galactic Empire. This was met with applause and overwhelming approval by the Senate, who desperately wanted peace and to see the war come to a close. They already loved the Chancellor and had surrendered more and more power to him until there was nothing left to give him except democracy itself. And this is how liberty died, with thunderous applause. They had done it. The Sith won, and the Republic had fallen. Through this entire timeline, it's now over. After generations of clamoring itself back from the brink of utter annihilation, there was nothing more the Republic could do to preserve itself in this moment. And furthermore, there was nothing the Jedi could do either. Not even Yoda, who faced down the Emperor in the ultimate clash of light and darkness. Even he knew it was over. Nor Kenobi, who fought Lord Vader in the Battle of Brothers, nor even when Obi-Wan defeated and dismembered Vader, leaving him to his death. None of it mattered. The Sith had finally won. They had won from the very moment the Rule of Two was instated. The Sith won because they changed, while the Republic and the Jedi mutually stagnated each other, made each other weak. But amidst all of this, a hope did survive. Before her passing, Padme Amidala had already been organizing a group to restore the Republic. They were there, the delegation of 2,000, a coalition of senators led by Mon Mothma and Bail Organa. They would be the foundation of the Alliance to restore the Republic, or later simply known as the Rebellion. And thus ends the history of the Galactic Republic from Star Wars lore. Finale. For 25 millennia, the Republic stood as the cradle of galactic society, gathering countless worlds and systems under its wings of protection and democracy. But while historians like to speak of it as a golden age of peace and progression, it was actually anything but. For most of its existence, the Republic was hanging by a thread, its feet dangling over the screaming pit of oblivion while clutching the strained arms of the Jedi. But once they turned against their protectors, the Republic was vanquished. The Empire would take its place and become a dark mockery of what it had once stood for. But while the Jedi may have faded into myth at this point, we must never forget the trials, tribulations, and the triumphs that the Republic saw in its day. Yes, it was ultimately a failing system indeed. Many times it caught fire due to its own doings, or could have been prevented with a little less fear and a little more wisdom. But ultimately, the Galactic Republic mapped the stars themselves. It established the civilization by which incredible stories were told, and it gave purpose to aimless monks who had been ousted from their home on Tython. And despite everything that came against it, the Galactic Republic stood just about as long as it could have. My friends, if you're listening to this now, then we here at the Archives want to give you a massive thank you. This titanic project made it worth it, and we sincerely hope you got some brand new knowledge from it. Whether you decided to binge this in one go of the workday, or broke this up into your daily mealtime videos, we are absolutely honored that you chose to watch us. Just as the Jedi could not exist without the Republic, these archives could not exist without you. We know we kept some of these events rather brief and to the point, so if there's any era or situation that you want an entire video focusing on, please be sure to comment it down below. But now it is about time that this holocron came to an end, so may the Force be with you, always.